Welcome everyone to our board meeting for today. So this is the second part of our open board meeting. And yesterday we had a good discussion about a number of different aspects of the standards, the things that we had learned over the last 10 months, in particular with the increasing use of our standards. It's a great opportunity to hear about in the marketplace, what we're learning on the usefulness of the standards, ways in which we can facilitate their use in the market. So it's been a great opportunity to hear back from the research team on that. And so what we have scheduled for today is to go over a number of more specific proposals on what we might be looking at in the future. And in particular, I would remind everyone that this is an open meeting, and so our open board meetings are to share with our constituents the work that we do and how we think about these issues. And so the materials are available on SASB's website for yesterday and today's meeting. If you go to the Standards Board and to the calendar section, you'll find the materials there. And as a reminder as well, this meeting is being recorded and will be available after the meeting as well. So we're going to be looking at a number of priorities today, and we have here in person our Standards Board, Dan Geltzer, Elizabeth Seeger, myself, Jeffrey Hales, Kurt Kuhn, Lloyd Kurtz, Mark Siegel, Bob Hurst, and Barry Chegar. And then we also have dialing in today, Stephanie Tang. Stephanie, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, great. And then we have with us as well that'll be presenting today, both in person and then also dialing as well a number of members of our research team. And so what we'll be doing today is looking at 6 different topics, 2 that relate to the governance of the work that we do, and then some examples of additional projects that could be addressed. And so we're going to be going through those, but we'll go ahead and kick right into it with a discussion of the rules of procedure. And that discussion is going to be led by Shivani. Shivani, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. And I'll go ahead and turn it to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you everyone for your time today. Again, my name is Shivani Kukreja. I am an associate analyst here on SASB's research team, and I have spent the last few weeks thinking about our rules of procedure document as well as our conceptual framework document and how the 2 documents can be improved. And I and others on the staff feel that there is definitely room for improvement, and I will go more into what that may entail for each of the documents, first the rules of procedure and the conceptual framework, all in the hope that we can eventually get approval from the Standards Board to proceed with these 2 projects, the first being the rules of procedure project to revise the rules of procedure document, and the second being the conceptual framework project to revise the conceptual framework document. And do I have access to the mouse? If not, can we please to the next slide? Great, thank you.
So just let us know when to advance the slide.
You should have access.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This is great. So again, I will start by talking about the rules of procedure. So I will start by talking about the necessity of the document, why it's so important, and then I'll move into where the staff feels there is room for improvement within the rules of procedure document, and then I will turn to the board to eventually vote on the advancement of this project. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as we know, the rules of procedure document governs SASB's standard setting process, and it ensures the integrity of SASB's operations and processes. And as of now, it does not reflect our updated mission statement, nor does it focus solely on our project-based approach. And I think this can put us at risk potentially. We don't want external parties thinking that we are misleading them about our operations in any way. That is not our intention. I also would not want this to undermine our perceived integrity as an organization. Next slide, please. So in order to understand what would actually need to be done, we can home in on that slide that you just saw there with the red outline. And first and foremost, we would need to reflect SASB's updated mission statement, which highlights SASB's global reach. We would also want to remove all traces of the 3-year revision cycle that we thought we would follow, and rather emphasize the project-based approach that we have followed and will continue to follow. And lastly, we would use this document to clarify or improve upon anything that may be confusing or misleading in any way. So for example, we could think more about the role of advisory groups in the standard setting and revising process. So I'm actually going to pause here and see if anyone has questions on anything that I've said so far. Great, I will take that as a sign that everyone can hear me and there are no questions.
We can hear you, thank you. Yeah, no
okay,
problem.
Perfect. So then we can move on to this next slide, please.
Shivani, you now have access to control the slides, so you go ahead and do it.
Great, thank you. And sorry everyone for the technical difficulties, just so everyone knows, I am presenting from San Francisco and the meeting is taking place in New York, so we apologize for any of those back and forth. Not sure why this is not moving. There we are. All right, apologies again. So I and Brian and David and others on SASB staff have done a bit of due diligence on the rules of procedure and where there may be opportunities for improvement. We've looked at internal stakeholder comments. We've also looked at SASB's comments in response to PCP comments. And we've also started to build out a bit of a project plan as well as a project team. And one thing that I do want to point out here is at the very bottom in number 6, it says that the project team will be tasked with defining the project's objectives, scope, and plan. And I just want to highlight this because Mark Siegel actually posed a really great question to me over email recently, and it's about the scope. And as I just laid out on a previous slide, the scope we envision right now will entail, again, updating the mission statement, and then emphasizing our project-based approach, and then clarifying or improving upon anything that we feel could be better stated. That being said, though, I put in that we still need to define scope only because we are still growing our project team as well as our review committee. And so I do want to acknowledge that the people who do end up joining the project team as well as the review committee will obviously have input, and we want to take that into account and recognize their input as well. So while we assume that the scope of the project will not veer too far from what we've already discussed, I did just want to put that out there and hopefully clarify anything that people had questions on regarding that aspect of the slide.
Sure, Shivani, I've got just thinking about scope for a bit.
Yeah.
But, you read through the rules of procedure. There's quite a bit of content in there. Kind of talk about our mission, the governance structure. Part of that is related to the oversight on the foundation board of our standards board, and then also internally the standards board's own governance as well. And then we get into the operating procedures, which I think of as really being the way in which we go through the process for updates to our standard settings, and then the different types of activities that we can engage in. So, my read through this is that almost every section of that could use an update to reflect our current thinking and also the best way we can move forward with our operations. And it could then also include commenting on things that we didn't anticipate, the helpfulness of clarity around that when we first wrote the rules of procedure. So the scope could be, narrow revisions to the existing document, could be a thorough review of the existing content, eliminating what's no longer needed, as well as updating. And then it could be also, the broadest would be thinking about any additional comments that we now think it could be helpful to expand on in our rules of procedure. And my view on this is we don't want to be rewriting this thing every year. And so to the extent that we do want to add anything, it should be really just very general principles that we expect to be regular parts of the way that we think. So I'll just stop there, and if you've got if your thoughts on that as a way to think about the scope of the project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you made all great points. I completely agree with everything you said. I think we do definitely want to use this as an opportunity to clarify or improve upon anything that could use some more clarity. Yeah, I mean, those are my only thoughts. I definitely don't want us to go back again after a few months or a year and revise this. I do think it should be a bit more high level, or as high level as it can be, while still accurately representing our thoughts and our operations and processes. And I'm definitely open to expanding the scope as much as that requires.
Quick question, I guess, that, to me, the scope is the entire document. The big step would be, does this in any way impact any other materials or processes beyond the scope of just a written document? Could it change anything through our procedural stuff and the
So yeah, that's a great way to think about it as well. So if in rewriting the rules of procedure, we were to identify like a different amount of time that we would expose proposed standard setting changes, that would change our operating procedure. And I believe that that aspect of content change would be scoped out of the budget. And we're not looking to rebuild the aspects of the process, but more update based on mission. And then some of the structure, we refer to like a vice chair role. We have 2 vice chairs right now. We can sort of expand that and essentially comment on the roles of the vice chairs as well. It can be clarified. But I don't think in terms of the way in which we go about the standard setting revision process, other than eliminating the reference to the potential to do a full review every 3 years.
I think a key point there is expanding on our approach on the project-based model. So the rules of procedure it stands today, it does explicitly state this approach to updating the standards around more of a project-based approach, but we need to build out some more detail or at least principles around what that process looks like. And then part of your question was also around materials and public communication. I take it there's some other updates that SASB is working on, and just things like SASB's website and other content to continue to try to clarify to the market what the project-based model is and how it works and how the market can engage with this model and this process.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. When we originally wrote the rules of procedure, it was thinking that in 3 years we would do this again and we would address things in a timely manner in between. Essentially what we're doing, if you were to read the document now, you would think big 3-year cycle and occasionally some project-based stuff. And I think in order to communicate to the marketplace the best way in which we plan to do our work, we just need to emphasize and clarify both what the project-based model is and so we thought more about what the criteria for project selection would be as well. That's not communicated anywhere, but we should communicate that here.
Well, is it fair to say then that this project wouldn't really involve a lot of substantive decision making? It's more a matter of informing this document the decisions that have already been made, or if there are substantive decisions that would have to be made. So you're going to highlight those now.
Shivani, feel free to follow on, but that's staff's interpretation. That's what we want to communicate, that it's possible to keep this project narrow in scope because it's more about clarifying, updating known issues that need to be updated, and then clarifying aspects that are already in it but just need to be built out more. So Dan, I think your comment is exactly right. The staff doesn't view major substantive changes needing to take or decisions needing to take place, but that will be part of the project planning that we will look to commence after this meeting.
I think I just endorsed on what Shivani said at the beginning. I think it's very important that our foundational documents mirror what we're actually doing. So in that sense, while this is sort of a plumbing issue, I think it should be a high priority.
Shivani, this is Robert. Just given the work you've done, the straw man and the other things, do you have a sense of this a several weeks or several months type of project?
I think it could be several weeks if we work hard on it. I've actually worked with those who are currently on the project team to come up with a list of questions that we have, and we'd like to pose them to Jeff and Brian and David and anyone else who might be interested in having that conversation with us. So we do actually feel like we have a good set of questions. There are maybe 25, 30 questions that we have on the rules of procedure document compiled already. And I think once we get the answers to that, it will be, I mean, knock on wood, hopefully an easier process to revise the rules of procedure based on those responses.
And I guess, so my point is, we approve something. I guess we don't have to know exactly what we're approving, but it would be nice to know what we are approving, because of, you know, it's going to be done in January or be done by October 15th. That's something to keep in mind. Then there was a comment made yesterday, and Brian, you brought up the word principles. We had a discussion yesterday about the fact that maybe there are a set of principles we need to create from our materials, and I actually think those principles are kind of embodied in the conceptual framework. So just the question is, in writing or updating the rules of procedure, do we need to think about any principles that we establish or not? So that's a question. I don't need an answer for it, but just something to take on as a.
One way to think about that, the possible point there is that we do sometimes reference alternative documents. And I think it is probably the case that the conceptual framework is referenced in the rules of procedure. I can't remember at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was cross-referencing there. And so we would want to make sure that if there is any cross-referencing, it's consistent. So the two projects could potentially affect each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have taken a look at that as well, actually. And while there is cross-referencing just by name, so the conceptual framework will reference the rules of procedure by name, there aren't large concepts that are cross-referenced. And so hopefully that will make everything a bit easier. And we have identified points in which there may be a bit of overlap. And so we will address those very targetedly.
Great. Thank you. Mark?
So, thanks for all this, Shivani. I think it's really, really helpful. The context that I'm trying to think about this, and I guess it's sort of building on, you know, all the comments that all the board members made, but I'm trying to think about this in the context of everything else that we haven't talked about yet, which is, you know, conceptual framework and other projects we might try to do too. Because I certainly agree that we absolutely need to update the rules of procedure for the 3-year revision cycle and some of the things that we're thinking about with the research project versus the standard setting agenda and things like that, you know, we want to be clear about it. I feel a lot better when you said this is more in the weeks to small number of months category than broader than that, because I feel like, you know, like obviously I want to do this, you know, we're going to consider the conceptual framework right after this. That's probably a little bit more significant than what this is.
Yeah.
I also want to save enough resources to tackle some of the other things that we're going to be talking about later this morning and early this afternoon. So in the context of you know, sort of a more targeted approach to fixing the things that we need to fix without doing a whole rewrite of the entirety of the rules of procedure, I'm entirely on board with that as a concept. But I'm trying to put it all in the basket together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark. Why don't we have Shivani share the last 2 slides of this segment and then see what other questions or comments board members have. It'll move a bit more into next steps.
Sure. Thank you. So as far as next steps are concerned, we envision getting the Standards Board's approval to advance this project. And then we'd like to continue to build out the project team and the review committee, as I've already alluded to. And then, of course, we will be creating a revised rules of procedure document. And we want to communicate this draft with the public in a way that seems appropriate to the Standards Board. So I will defer to you on that. And then we will be looking for a second round of approval from the Standards Board for the revised rules of procedure document.
So I had a question, why does the rules of procedure have to be subjected to anybody in the public looking at it? It's our documents, our way. So I'm not saying it's wrong, but I understand public comment around standards, having their own internal operating procedures, you know, are those ours? Or have we already decided that everybody gets to make comments about those?
Well, I think it'll be transparent afterward what our revised procedures are. It's transparent right now what they are, and you know, I think my view is that it's helpful to know public view of that, and if they can have suggestions that we view as helpful, we should take those into consideration. So we are not required to actually post for comments the rules of procedure, and to make it clear for everyone, this is not a standard setting exercise. This is our governance. So we have some latitude here. We did previously expose the rules of procedure for public comment prior to adopting them in 2017. So we can do that again, or we could not do that, or we can also do it in an expedited fashion rather than waiting for 90 days. So we certainly have the ability to decide. I don't know that we need to decide that today. It might be that in looking at the scope of provisions later, that would indicate whether or not we thought it was how important we thought it was to actually leave it out there for public comment. So it's a good question, and I think it's not one that has to be decided today, but one that we should definitely think about. And in general, my view is leaning towards transparency, but sure.
Is there any backlog of significant further feedback that we received at that exposure, sort of exposure that we've since collected on the rules of procedure and conceptual framework that
Shivani, have you,
might warrant that?
yeah, when you went back to the public comments, any takeaways from that original public comment period?
To be completely honest, it's been a while, and I'd have to look back at comments and get back to you on that.
Yeah, I realize it's difficult to ask you to think about something from 2017, and to the extent it was incorporated.
No problem.
It'll be something we want to think about, and
For sure, and it's definitely on our radar. Any other thoughts?
Not on this slide. You want to cover the last slide?
Yes, sure. All right, so this is a great conversation. I'm really glad that we're talking about scope. It's probably one of the most important things we can talk about with these types of projects, especially with a governance document. You really want to get that scope right. So thank you for that conversation. I'm sure we can talk about it more after this slide. But hopefully I've given you a good sense of why the rules of procedure document is so important, what an update would look like, what due diligence has already been done, and then what next steps would look like or could look like for this rules of procedure document. And I just want to remind you that we are hoping to gain approval to advance the rules of procedure project to update the rules of procedure document. And I would say that you're voting on the existence of this project and the fact that this should be a project that the staff is working on, not as much how it'll actually be executed, though we will be working very closely with you to continue to clarify scope and make sure that we all agree with what's being done with the document.
Thanks, Shivani. Yeah, the way I think about this is really we're at this point looking for the board view on the importance of this as a project and whether it's something that we should move forward with now. To me, it definitely seems like the time is right and it's important to address it in a way that is transparent and careful as well as just updating what needs to be updated. So. Yeah. I don't think yeah, but we don't even have to on this one. It's actually this whole discussion of the chair to actually dictate the project exists. But if you would like to
Was that the rules of procedure?
That is right, yeah. So what I'm particularly interested in is whether there are any concerns with this project from the board. Otherwise, I think we would definitely move forward with it. So certainly hearing no objections, we'll anticipate moving forward with this project and look forward to working with you, Shivani, and we'll look forward to an update as soon as you can want to do that. And you were also going to talk to us about the Conceptual Framework project as well, which falls into a very similar bucket as the rules of procedure. Probably why your name's on both of them. So happy to let you jump right into that unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on the rules of procedure.
Perfect. No, thank you very much. If there are no other questions with the rules of procedure, then I'm happy to move into the conceptual framework. The story of the conceptual framework document is very similar, as you said, to that of the rules of procedure document. So I will say on the offset that I do envision that the conceptual framework updates will be more involved than those of the rules of procedure. So again, let's begin by talking about why the conceptual framework is important and where the staff feels there is room for improvement within the document. And then I will end by laying out what I'm hoping that the board can eventually vote on. So as we all know, the conceptual framework document lays out SASB's objectives, assumptions, and definitions that guide the organization's thinking and approach to standard setting and revising. And as it stands today, it does not reflect our updated mission statement, nor does it reflect SASB's global reach. And it also contains some outdated assumptions, definitions, and data. A lot of the data cited in the document is from 2015 and 2016, and I do feel that there's definitely updated data that we can use when citing, evidence. So in order to see what an actual update would require, let's home in on this box outlined in red here. So again, we would want to update the mission statement to highlight SASB's global reach. We would also want to remove all references to US-based regulations. So there are references to the 10K and other US-based documentation. So we would want to be mindful of that and clarify that where need be. And again, we also want to update assumptions and definitions and data cited in the document. And just as we want to with the rules of procedure, we would like to clarify and improve upon anything that can be confusing or misleading in the document. And I'm going to pause here again to see if anyone has questions.
So Shivani, this is Bob, and it ties back to my comment on principles. So in the conceptual frameworks I've been involved in, they have been principle-based conceptual frameworks. So those magic number of principles kind of drives everything. So I think that addresses that and has it on the point. And I think all the updating is really good. As we talked about yesterday, we have the conceptual framework with the triangle, right, and all those items. And is our sense, Brian or David, that most of that is in pretty good shape, and it's just other kind of wording updating we need to do, or would we actually see actually different set of language?
Yeah, it's a good question, Bob. And I welcome this kind of thinking and interrogation around some of these core principles and concepts. With that said, staff's view is that when we look at that visualization of the triangle that summarizes the conceptual framework, if we look at the topic as the three core objectives of the SASB standards, or if we look at the bottom of the three fundamental tenets of the SASB standards, we feel very, very strongly about those. And so would not think that staff would come forward with any change there. That's core to SASB and the purpose of the standards, and there's complete confidence at the staff level in those kind of core objectives and fundamental tenets. When we look at a little bit more detail, we have 5 principles for topic selection and 9 criteria that help guide our metric selection. I think this general staff view is that we feel good and strongly about those, but want to interrogate further to see if there is any room for additional thinking on what principles can drive our determinations around financial materiality, what criteria can help drive our determinations around the most useful and cost-effective metrics. So that would be our view, that it's worth at least raising the topic and having discussions with the board around, is there an opportunity for improvement there? I don't know the answer to that right now. I'd be interested in comments from David or Jeff or others here.
But, I think of the conceptual framework, being, it is a governing document to what we do, similar to the rules of procedure, except rules of procedure is more logistical, the way in which we're structured, the things in which we require ourselves to do in order to do our job in a way that trusted standard setters should. The conceptual framework is exactly that, a way that we think about the standard setting exercise that we go through. And so it's very important for, it is primarily intended for guiding our work at SASB. And there's another aspect of it that I think is also important, and it's a secondary aspect, but it's an important aspect as well. And it's the communicative part of what we do, so that people can look at the decisions that we've made, but it's also important that they understand the reasoning behind that, and much of that would be founded on the conceptual framework. So I completely agree with Brian that I think at the highest level, material information decision, useful, cost effectiveness, that's core to what we do. I think that in the middle of the triangle, when we think about the criteria for topic selection and metric selection, that the language in there was intended to help our thinking and intended to help communicate what it is that we try to do. And I would be very interested as part of this project to dig a bit more into the extent to which that the language there, as the team's been trying to do their work, which parts of that were particularly helpful in decision making, and which ones might have been sort of subsumed by another word. If there's redundant language in there, we don't need to subject everything to two looks at essentially what ends up being the same thing, or if there's something missing from that would have been helpful to embed into our thinking, as well as communicate what's driving the choices that we make. I think that's important as well. So an opportunity to do work there.
I think what you're suggesting then is that to the extent we would clarify criteria for, say, topic selection or method selection, it's more a matter of making sure that the current descriptions conform to what we're doing in practice rather than changing how we select topics.
And I think, it may be the case that not all criteria were created equal, and that some are more important to the work that we do, and we want to make sure that those are emphasized. And if there's things that are missing, we also want to make sure that we're articulating what's guiding the best practices that we are trying to do.
I also want to add here, what you talked about, the objectives not likely to change. We want to remain focused on material decision, useful, cost-effective standards, producing those. And the fundamental tenets are not likely to change. We're always going to remain market informed with our transparent process and market feedback, and industry specific, which is really guiding our whole concept and approach here. But on the evidence-based tenet, I think there's an opportunity to put it sort of define, update the definition, and help the market better understand what we mean by evidence. We hear questions, did SASB perform some kind of back test to understand that this is a material topic for companies, and so we can do a better job at being transparent and helping the market understand what we mean by that.
Joanne, I've got some more thoughts on scope, but I want to give you a chance to get through the materials.
Oh, thank you. This is a great conversation. This next slide actually covers a lot of what we've just discussed. These are just examples of issues for all of us to align on around the scope of the Conceptual Framework project beyond the minimum needs that I detailed in an earlier slide. So again, these are just thoughts, but it's a lot of what we've just talked about, so I can gloss over this slide unless anyone has any thoughts on this.
Certainly, the financial materiality definition and description continues to be a priority. We talked about that yesterday a little bit, but making sure we're consistent and clear about what that means in our conceptual framework is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just want to make sure that the market does not need more clarity on our definition of financial materiality.
Great, thank you.
I guess I got a general question. Is the conceptual framework thought of here as mostly for the purpose, or is it more for the purpose, maybe it's both, is it purpose for help the board make decisions on the actual standards themselves? And, or is it also for constituents to understand the basis how we try to make those decisions? As I'm saying, it's probably both.
Both, yeah, I would say both.
We actually reference the conceptual framework during the process of evaluating the standards.
But I think of it in the order that you said it. First, for the decision-making of the board, the guide, the work that we do, and second, it serves a communication tool.
I think if you, in reading the document operationally, a lot of the language is structured around how we make decisions, and then as a corollary, giving the market understanding of how those determinations were made.
Shivani, you want to?
Right? Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Giovanni, any sense of that this one is bigger than a bread box, or scope and time and scale?
Or you can table that until we come to the end if you're more comfortable after you've heard more of what we're thinking.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing that last question. Would you mind restating that? I'm just having a little trouble hearing.
The question from Kurt was on how big of a project this might end up being, and feel free to address that now, or if you want to opine on that, and you kind of heard more of the board's thoughts, or you could come back to it again later.
Yeah, I mean, my initial thought, and we can come back to this, is that I think it's as big as we choose for it to be, as long as the conceptual framework accurately represents our thinking as an organization. And so we can go into, we can reconsider a lot of topics if we want to, or we can choose to keep them as they are because we're happy with how they work now. And so there may be room for improvement. Now it's not the time to go about that. So I think it's really up to us as an organization to decide that. I think, again, as long as it accurately represents our thinking, then I think that's, fair game.
Yeah, I think you've got some pretty good examples of what some of the high-level topics might be. So curious to have you walk through that.
Right, yeah, and this is definitely a dialogue. So, I'll continually check in with those interested to hear more about what you guys are thinking, where you think the scope should be, if anything's changed since the last time we spoke. So it's, I think, going to be an iterative process, because I do envision this being a lot more involved than the rules of procedure will be, just given the content in the document.
Well, why don't we hit on some of the high-level topics in some of the next slides.
So I was going to go into what's already been accomplished. And so what we've done for the rules of procedure has also been done for the conceptual framework. So we've read through the comments and read through SASB's responses to comments. We've started to build out a project plan, and we've started to build out a project team and review committee as well. And then as far as next steps are concerned, they are the same as next steps for the rules of procedure. So we will continue to build out the project team as well as the review committee, and we will create a revised conceptual framework document, and we will communicate this draft to the public, and again, in a way that seems appropriate to the Standards Board. And then we will look to the Standards Board to give us a final round of approval on a revised conceptual framework document. And again, we are looking to have the Standards Board approve the advancement of the Conceptual Framework project so that we can revise the Conceptual Framework document. One thing I will say, though, is though we are ready to ask for approval for both projects, we still have some questions, and that leads us to this last slide here. So I'd be curious to hear thoughts on where you've heard market opportunities for clarity within the conceptual framework, and then if there are particular stages at which you would like decision-making, ability, or however you want to phrase that.
Can I just, we had a discussion a minute ago about exposing the rules of procedure to public comment. What was the conceptual framework previously exposed
provisions? Yeah, it's a good question. So the conceptual framework was originally exposed prior to being adopted. And again, I think good procedure would be to expose it for public comment, but I'm feeling more strongly for this document than for the rules of procedure, although I feel personally that exposing both is important. But I would also think that exposing this for a full 90-day period at a minimum would be helpful. In part because it has this dual purpose, not only to guide the work that we do, and we want to make sure that our thinking has had the opportunity to be informed by market input on that, but also because of it serving a communication device. If there are words that we're using that could potentially be misinterpreted, then we, again, would want the opportunity to clarify that before we adopt it rather than having to address it a second time. So my view would be that it would be very important to expose the proposed revisions of the conceptual frameworks prior to adoption.
I guess one advantage of that is that it probably encourages people to read it and understand it too. So in some ways, that act alone will highlight and remind people of our basic approach and philosophy.
Yeah. We should probably stamp it with confidential if they don't read it.
I don't. If I can bring us down into the dirt, I guess, of just practical issues, it would be nice if we could review this in a fairly final state at our December board meeting. At least have a substantive discussion at that.
Oh, I will speak up there, and I agree with having a substantive discussion, but from a staff perspective, we won't be able to be committal in any way on having a draft ready for review. I think that just for an abundance of clarity, what Shivani and staff is asking of the board today is approval of this as a project based on the minimum scope and minimum needs, knowing that we have known issues and known opportunities for improvement, but then launch into more project planning where the board and a board committee needs to be involved to help establish that scope. And then when this is kind of the next steps on when drafts might be available for review or might be able to be produced are going to be entirely dependent on that scope. And that's a complicated question. That's a big question. That was the intent of the earlier slide on some of the examples of issues we could go into around scope. So it would be virtually impossible for us to make any comment on timing of this until we have a better grasp of scope. Rules of procedure projects is different, but this one we really need to get our arms around scope. If there's a desire to keep this much more minimal from the board, then obviously that would accelerate the timeline, and that would be a good discussion to have as we move more into project planning. And again, all we're looking for today is approval and concept as a project, initial views, reactions around things like scope, to then enable us to quickly move forward into more project planning.
Just on the issue of scope, Shivani, you asked about had we heard things that could be helpful for us to consider in a revision, and we can think about that as part of the project itself, but just to comment on a few issues that we could think about. We mentioned just making sure that the words around materiality, financial materiality, are understood, what we mean by those words. And I think related to that, we often get questions around horizon. How do we think through horizon issues? And so that is the type of thing that are articulated in the conceptual framework so people understand thinking. I've also heard, that sometimes there's a question about are we trying to be only backward looking, or what's the role of that? And I think that one thing that might be really helpful in the conceptual framework to think about is, how do we think about the role of historical performance data in terms of being useful for future forecasting and decision making, as well as thinking about the role for scenario planning, analyses, setting targets, and how that all fits into the guidance that we're giving to companies. We could also think about articulating the way that we consider other efforts that are out there. The Better Alignment Project has provided us a lot of thoughts around the way that we think about the work that we do, and if it the work that we do, rather, as opposed to how we talk about the work that we do, there are maybe different opportunities to incorporate some of that into the conceptual framework. We happen to bucket our general issue categories into 5 topics. That's, I think there's an opportunity to think about how we think of our general issue categories and the extent to which it might be easier for the marketplace to understand the work that we do if we thought about that a bit differently, even if we're not changing the general issue categories or anything like that. So I do hear some opportunities to think about communicating better the alignment that we have existing with other organizations that are out there. So those are really just a few of the things that I think that could be thought about in considering a revision to the conceptual framework.
Thank you. I've made note of those, and we will definitely look into all of them. Thank you.
And hearing all that, I remove my request.
Thank you, Kurt.
I am concerned, for our leaders, would ask if we can do a build scope work. Clearly, there's, I think Dan's point, we want to map this to what we're doing, right? So that seems, it's not the work of a moment, but that's, we should be doing it right away. And what you described, Jeff, strikes me as, incorporating feedback we received from, learning, right? What we've learned, and should we think a little bit anticipatorily and incorporate that in the document? And then we also have guidance, obviously, from the Foundation Board on what is the mission of SASB. So is there a 4th category that's, if there is, it sounds to me like a messy and complex one, of higher order stuff that might be disruptive? And can we rule that out? Can we say, we're going to map to what we're doing, we're going to incorporate learning, we're going to incorporate the mission of the foundation, and not anything else?
We could certainly agree to that. I do think maybe as a practical matter, and I'm very, very interested in the board's view on the extent to which this is something that we want to move forward with right now, and if there are any concerns around it. This sounds like scope is a bigger concern here than it was with the rules of procedure, because again, we don't want to crowd out our opportunities to make advances on other important issues that we're looking at. So I'll ask for that in a moment, but I think a practical next step would be to construct a team and do an initial mock-up of areas that could be addressed and issues that are not in there but could be brought in, and then we would look to, I think, circulate that for board feedback on scope issues.
I think that's an ideal use for a board and committee working hand in hand with you guys to separate the wheat from the chaff and give us some choices.
I could even put a finer point on it. I think as part of that, I think, because I totally agree with Roy in that, as you're thinking about scope, I would also start to think about attaching resources and FTEs to it, because I think while I absolutely think that the minimum scope that you guys have outlined is something that we need to do and try to do right now, what I wouldn't want to do is tie up too much of our resources trying to rewrite areas of this and take away from the possibility of advancing on things like, that we might talk about earlier, which my own personal preference is human capital, something, I kind of want to tackle sooner rather than later. So to the extent that we think about scope and attaching FTEs to it, so that it gives us a little bit of understanding of what it might take away from if we start to get into the broader scope that maybe we want to tackle, but maybe not right away. And maybe think about phasing if we end up doing those kinds of things. So.
Yeah, I think, when we think about projects in general, we think about mission alignment, scope, prevalence, capacity, and feasibility. Those same types of principles actually are kind of helpful in thinking about the scope of this particular project. We want to make sure that what we do is mission aligned, and things that we can do to make sure that the work we do and the way that we communicate it are mission aligned is, of course, paramount. And then how big of an issue are we potentially talking about as we think of the scope? Do we have the capacity to actually address it? And is there, there may be some, wouldn't it be great if a conceptual framework could X, right? But if we don't sort of see a clear vision for how we could sort of come to a reasonable solution in a reasonable amount of time to something that we might like to do or comment on, that may not be wise use of our time right now, because it's not something that leads to clear changes in what we do or necessarily even how we communicate it later on. So I think we'll try to apply that same thinking.
And I think we all agree, we're going to anchor on that pyramid and keep the basic concepts, in place. And then also we don't want this to be a junk drawer document, right? So we'll do that.
Yeah. Great, Shivani. I think I'd like to ask actually if there are any concerns at this point from the board actually. So anything else? Clearly a concern about scope, making sure we manage that well. I think that's important. Any other thoughts or concerns? I think it's hugely important. Great. So we will plan to have the team move forward with this project as well and put a team together, including a board subcommittee, and come to some pretty clear decisions around scope before moving forward.
Thank you.
Great.
Shivani.
Thank you all so much for your time and for your consideration. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for presenting. We appreciate you covering both of these projects. Thanks, Shivani.
Of course. Thank you. And I will hand it over to Kelly now to talk about human capital.
Jeff, welcome any framing or intro on your part on human capital. Otherwise, we'll look to Kelly to have her run through the session. I think one thing that would be helpful for this session specifically is if it's possible to hold discussion and questions until the end. Kelly has some content we want to make sure we definitely get through. So if you have an urgent question or something that's very unclear, feel free to bring it up. But with that said, want to make sure to give Kelly the chance to get through the content here, then launch into the discussion from there. If that sounds good.
I agree. We will hold questions and look at you, Kurt. We will hold questions until Kelly invites them. Kelly, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This is Kelly Okuji-Wilson here in San Francisco. And like Shivani, I just wanted to make that note. So if there's any technical errors, please note that we are working remotely. I did want to thank the board for their time today for consideration of this research project on human capital, given that it is a hotly discussed topic throughout this board session. Before we dive into the details of the research project proposal, I just wanted to quickly go over the agenda for today. I did want to just discuss our objective today, some of the details around the research project proposal, discuss why human capital is important and what do we think are the key drivers to why we should prioritize this project, and discuss some of the current state of human capital and standards, just kind of taking a step back and looking what's currently within our standards, and then open it up for discussion and questions and feedback. Our objective today is really quite simple. We're seeking the board's approval to advance the Human Capital Framework as a formal research project. And the purpose of this project would really be to assess the prevalence and scope of human capital management themes across our sectors and industries, to see what themes are cross-cutting, what is industry-specific. We'd also like to assess the financial materiality of these topics, and then assess feasibility to create an evidence-based view on human capital. Some of the objectives of this proposal would be to design and implement a systematic way to identify these issues, and also to identify maybe a more comprehensive view on our general issue categories under our conceptual framework, specifically within our human capital pillar. And the outcome of this would be to create a solid evidence-based view on human capital, which we hope we could use as a decision lever for the board to approve this project into the standard setting phase. So this, we just wanted to touch on two key drivers here of why we think that human capital is important and why it should be prioritized as a research project. One of which is we have been seeing very strong signals from the market and market interest and engagement on this issue. There's really three areas of focus that have been driving this. One is the fundamental shift in the market perspective, better prioritizing human capital. The second is increased national and state regulation and policy, not only here in the U.S., but also abroad. And the third is within our own feedback network, we've seen a lot of interest and engagement on this topic. Some examples of this are in the boxes, kind of pointing to the circles. So in terms of fundamental shifts, just recently in August, we had the 2019 Business Roundtable where human capital was the emphasis of that session, and also the SEC modernization of Regulation SK rulemaking proposal, which also recently came out. And in terms of increased regulation, just recently in September, the California Gig Economy Bill, or AB5, was signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom recently, kind of discussing the shift of contractors to employees. But we've also seen other regulation, especially in the EU. Some examples are listed, including the EU Commission Directive, the 2015 UK Modern Slavery Act, etc. And within our own feedback network, I think Marvin and Janine had talked about this yesterday, but within our IAG, human capital was pulled as the #1 issue that our investors would like to address. Within the SAG, it was a reoccurring theme within the survey, and we've also had just various other comments through our public comment period and other interactions with stakeholders prioritizing human capital. Another key driver here is we've been seeing some fundamental shifts in the nature of human capital, and within the circle, these are 4 themes that we've identified as prevalent issues and consideration of emerging themes. Just kind of going around the horn here, it's the future of work, so the role of technology within high-skilled jobs versus low-skilled jobs, and how does that kind of manifest itself. We've touched upon the definition of employee, just given an age where there's increase in contracting work and different types of labor statuses. What does the definition of employee mean? What does that mean for disclosure and for the impact on the firm itself? And the third theme is employee well-being, and how do we quantify the value and its contribution to the firm's long-term value creation. I think the fourth, which we talked about yesterday as well, is global applicability of our standards. So how do we improve the global applicability of our standards, especially in relation to how pervasive human capital is across several industries? So just taking a step back here, I'd like to just kind of give you a snapshot of where human capital is currently sitting within our standards. So as a reminder, on the left, this is the 5 pillars of within our conceptual framework, of which human capital is one. And below are the 3 general issue categories that are encompassed within human capital. But as you can see highlighted in red, human capital is a very pervasive issue, and it kind of seeps into other areas and other general issue categories outside of the human capital pillar. And some examples of that include like supply chain management and our technical protocols. Sometimes those address issues related to workers' rights. So that is, could be related to human capital. Another example is in systematic risk management, especially in our financial sector. We talk about a metric for remuneration of risk-taking employees. So some of these are just examples of where human capital can be outside of the human capital pillar. And just looking at our human capital and within our standards by the numbers, this is based off of our provisional standards. But the point being here is, 60% of our industries touch upon human capital topics, and 30% of our disclosure topics deal with human capital related issues, and about 14% of our metrics deal with human capital issues. And when you apply the same analysis to our codified standards, the percentages are roughly the same. But I think what this really highlights here is that we're very strong on our employee health and safety teams, and to some extent labor practices, but other issues like employee diversity and inclusion are not as well addressed. And just given the emerging themes, this could be an area of improvement. I wanted to show this slide to kind of show the current state of human capital. We did a preliminary gap analysis, and on the left-hand side, you'll see that we wanted to test our thinking here. So on the left-hand side are just a broader, categorization of human capital themes based off of the Human Capital Management Coalition's petition to the SEC, and that is stacked up against our general issue categories. And the dots on the left kind of show the alignment and the prevalence of the themes from the HCMC categories versus our general issue categories. And again, employee health and safety was very strong, that's why it's green. And we cover other areas, which are the ones in yellow, but workforce skills and capabilities, workforce productivity are maybe not as well covered and could be an area of further exploration, and we could address in our current standards. So I just wanted to walk through, how the metrics kind of flow through our current framework. This is an example of employee health and safety using the extractive minerals industry as an example. We have a disclosure topic, which is workforce health and safety that is embodied in employee health and safety, and the accounting metric is very robust, and it's a pretty common metric throughout our standard that addresses that issue through fatality rates, near-miss frequency rates, postal time, and contract employees. But this is an example of our employee recruitment, inclusion, and performance, and how we measure it is through voluntary and involuntary turnover rate, which is, may show how employees are cycling through a company, but may not be touching upon the issues that we identified in the previous slide. So there is some work to be done, perhaps, in some of our general issue categories. This is also just showing how, an example of labor practices as a general issue category, and I think it kind of tells a similar story, but is more moderately covered within our standards. So just to kind of sum up, I think the previous slides showed some of our challenges in the past that have been brought up through market feedback, one of which is maybe a lack of breadth in our standards. There is maybe a lot of white space on our materiality map, and that human capital, just given how pervasive an issue it is, maybe it could be more robustly addressed across our sectors and industries. The second issue maybe being a lack of depth, which I think that preliminary analysis shows that maybe there is other issues that are, we could more robustly cover within industries and address the more industry-specific nature of certain human capital issues. But the other two boxes, I think, highlight some opportunities for us. Given these challenges, I think, with the momentum in the market for human capital management exposure and, interest in this issue, and, given our position post-codification, we have the advantage to really assess this issue across multiple sectors and within industries and have the opportunity to address these past challenges and incorporate some of the emerging fundamental shifts that we have been seeing on this topic. So just to kind of sum up, this project is really meant to address the scope and prevalence of these themes across our 77 industries, to show financial materiality of these themes, and also to address feasibility, just assuming that these themes are relevant and material. We'd also like to address how do we maximize value in our existing framework for investors by incorporating these fundamental shifts, and how do we build a framework to accommodate a possible globalization of our standards. And with that, I think I'd like to open up the session for any questions, especially related to the board's view on the project objectives and outcomes at this time, and if there's any additional questions or feedback you may have for us.
Thanks, Kelly. Bob?
Kelly Spavers, on slide 135, there's the circle and there's the 4 pieces of pizza there that have future work efforts to employee employment being and globally applicable potential. Does that come from somewhere? Did you make those words up, or what's the source of that?
Yes. Sorry, I hope you all can see the slides.
Yep.
There we go. Great. So this is just some themes that we've identified, just speaking to the research staff, kind of looking at documents and past feedback from all stakeholders. They seem to be prevalent issues more broadly, but I would preface that it's not necessarily industry specific, but they have been prevalent themes.
So we think this is kind of your word. They didn't come from a model or a source or another organization?
No, this is just a compilation of essentially what we have been hearing from stakeholders and based off of our analysts' industry knowledge.
The next question is, there's already a lot of human capital work and publications that are already out there, in addition to the current things around the SEC, all kinds of firms have written things on human capital. So have you looked at any of that yet, or would that be part of the scope of your work so that you didn't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel? And also we could, again, cite a credible references to where we got our information to our conclusions.
Yes, absolutely. Based off of kind of just a compilation of, readings and speaking, market feedback, I think we could have specific citations, tied to these themes. But I think, unfortunately, these themes are very universal, and our goal is to find industry-specific evidence and tying that to financial materiality. So we wouldn't be able to cite, documentation for that, and that would be part of the scope of this project, is to find that evidence that is industry-specific.
Kelly, could you jump to the slide that has the human capital categories from the Human Capital Management Coalition?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So one way that I think about the potential scope of this project, and actually before I say that, let me emphasize that I think that this is a hugely important topic. We've known that it's an important topic. That's why it's the second most commonly referenced item in our standards. And yet we know that this is an ongoing area of evolved thinking and understanding, and the world is continually changing. So I think I'm really glad to see that we're taking this as an opportunity to refine our thinking and take advantage of some of the best current thinking, to Bob's point, just now that is out there, and try to apply it through our industry-based lens. I'm looking at this particular slide and thinking, this project could have a number of different scopes. It could be that we try to look at human capital in the same way that we have looked at it previously, and make sure that we not miss any opportunities for the industries where it could be financially material, just based on what we're now hearing back from the marketplace in today's world. But it also looks like there are some additional items or ways of thinking about this that really just weren't captured in our general issue categories to begin with, and so you could also think of this having a more a more fundamental effect on the work that we do if we add some additional general issue categories and then try to look across all industries for the extent to which those would there could be evidence of investor interest and financial impact on that to meet our threshold of financial materiality. So, wondering if you could comment on that and any thoughts on what you think the right type of scope would be, the right way to tackle it.
Sure. I think at this point, we are taking a very broad approach, trying to think more openly about, or keep an open mind about how to think about this framework. I know in the past that we did have a framework, and we're testing other ideas. This is just an example of how we kind of tested our thinking. I will say that the HCMC categories, that is just one way of thinking, and it was just a way to kind of test what we currently have, assess some potential gaps. It's not to say necessarily that there wouldn't be other areas to explore, or maybe there's consolidation of these issues. But I do think this, kind of highlights that there is more research to be done, and especially given the market interest and engagement and the evolving themes in human capital, it's definitely worth the exploration and the additional research to kind of identify what are prevalent, what is industry specific, and how, and once we know that, kind of how does that manifest, in a technical way through our standards.
So if I could make sure I understand that response correctly, I think you're saying it's not just a relook at what we've done, and it's not just a much bigger addition to some additional ways that we might think about human capital across our standards, but it's an even bigger, let's make sure that we know specifically what those types of projects, or the types of human capital categories would be, and think carefully about that, and then think about the best way to approach a look at our standards and our opportunities to make sure that they reflect these important issues.
Yeah, but if I can add on to that, Jeff, Kelly in an earlier slide laid out 3 objectives for the research project phase of this work, and one of those objectives is taking a view on general issue categories. And so that's staff acknowledgement that maybe there's an opportunity for improvement there. And I think that kind of testing our thinking, like Kelly just explained, through looking at it through the lens of a different categorization structure, kind of helps illustrate the importance of pressing our thinking on that point. I would even just share another comment. We saw, green circle from this kind of preliminary analysis of prevalence of the standard connected to employee health and safety. I mean, even there, even though that green circle is there, even there, I would say we need to press our thinking on employee health and safety, considering aspects like employee well-being isn't nearly as well represented as something more like very, very direct injury and safety related topics and metrics. And so very, very far from any kind of a formal staff conclusion or position on that, but just another example of pressing our thinking around general issue categories, given that they lay the foundation for standard setting.
That's what right on the red, yellow, green slide that Jeff's looking at. So when I kind of read this, I said, Human Capital Management Coalition, that's good. That's maybe a credible source. I looked at the date. So I'm sort of interpreting this as, we did good work when we did good work. But did this material actually come out, and these categories kind of come out from this group after we had sort of done most of our work on human capital?
Certainly the provisional before the human capital. That's specific. Yeah. And there's been a lot in the last 2 years.
I did want to ask about, and I'm not sure if this is for Kelly or for other folks on the board. capital as a source of intangible value is also, I think, been raised at SASB and some of the other standards that we've applied. And I'm curious, if anyone's gotten to the finish line with that, or if this is sort of at the working group stage in some of these organizations.
I'm happy to talk about where FASB was on this. This was absolutely raised, to potentially account for workforce on the balance sheet. And it was debated, and researched very, very thoroughly at the SASB staff level. And what it came down to was a question of measurement. There was recognition that there is an asset, there, but the only financial accounting measures that usually are used by the FASB are cost or fair value. And the cost of the employee is one that, you could probably get there, you could probably describe it, although there's difficulties even in that. How much of the CEO's salary should you allocate to training or allocate to mentoring, and how much of the cost should you actually burden onto that? You could probably get there and get to a cost number that may or may not be relevant 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. That was the cost when the employee was first brought on. And so you might be able to get there, and it might not be relevant for long after it was measured. The other approach to think about was fair value, and then you would fair value your workforce every year, and which is a very, very complicated and costly exercise, which is also subjective in nature. And then as the fair value changes from year to year, say it goes up in a particular year, which you would hope, does that reflect income that the company earned during that year? Does it reflect, where do you reflect that on the income statement, and how do you reflect that improvement in value as a performance-related measure? And basically what the FASB ended up saying at the end of the day is neither of these feels like it's that appropriate for measurement. Also, if you ended up with fair value, you couldn't get a return on your investment metric that would be most useful. You can if you do cost. But, so at the end of the day, the FASB said, there's an asset, we can't come up with a feasible solution that meets our cost-benefit thought process to actually tackle it for a balance sheet item. And so they sort of said, let's keep it on the research. Should we think about other disclosures that we potentially can do, or focusing on just R&D as another area. But that's where that whole topic went. It was a pretty thorough analysis.
Mark, the fair value, is that kind of what the market is for your employees, or what's just, is there a simple concept around fair value of how that would work?
Concept, yes. The simple concept would be, what would two market participants agree to the value of that workforce if you were transferring that workforce from UPS to another company?
Yeah, you buy a company, what extra do you pay because of the workforce?
So in concept, yeah, but
Well,
you would end up with a very, very costly exercise in order to calculate that goodwill, having to get a third-party valuation done every year. And again, it would be a range you would normally think of, and you're coming up with a point estimate in that range to get to a balance sheet that has to be audited. That again, then compared to last year, is that number really the performance of the company because they sold widgets or what? And so it wasn't deemed to be the most faithful representation of what that asset is. Right.
So to follow up on that, I think we can see how because they have to, that has to fit in the financial statements, there's a valuation aspect if it were going to be incorporated into the financial statements. So the complementary value of what we can bring to the marketplaces to help investors understand it through alternative metrics that reflect more activities of the company around how they manage human capital. But the measurement issue isn't eliminated for us either. And I think as we think about what are the important aspects of human capital, we've got an existing lens that we do look at, and this project will be important for thinking about how we want to push our thinking on that. But at the end of the day, if we also can't come up with, for those categories, useful metrics, then identifying those categories will be of limited value to our standards and to the use of our standards. So there is still a measurement angle there, although it's probably one step easier because it doesn't have to translate it all into a dollar value.
Yeah, I do think there are a couple of positive takeaways from that information. One is that you have a well-resourced project that determines material.
Mm-hmm.
So the question of materiality is addressed just by the existence and the high degree of evolution the project went through. The other is we don't have quite the same challenge of FASB, where FASB has defined things comprehensively. We're simply specifying corporate disclosures would be helpful to investors. So I think that's not as heavy a lift as the FASB set for itself.
100%. Yeah, I think Lloyd,
Sorry.
the broad topic, the issue of materiality, I guess, yeah, the broad topic, clearly, there's no question. I think the challenge is the materiality of the specific elements for the metric is a tougher, one of the challenges, I think, of this whole sector here, or this topic is, that's where the challenge lies, is that's why we don't cover the map with it, I guess, the way we do some of these other elements.
But again, in some ways, it's easier. The FASB setting a standard that would, if they were going to do something, just to have to account for all human capital. And that ends up being pretty challenging in ways where we're going to look, to your point, like at aspects of human capital management, so we can then benefit from the fact that we're doing this on an industry-by-industry basis. So can tailor the specific topics or to what happens to be prevalent in that business.
Unrelated question. So first of all, I thought this presentation was very well made. Thank you for making us wait to the end. I think that was helpful. And I get why now, and I get why human capital. We do have some other cross-cutting issues that also have a why now component to them. And so maybe not why right now, but a why now component to it. So I was just wondering if you could give us just a minute on sort of your vision for those other cross-cutting components. So maybe, one thing I can imagine is that I think this sets up a framework that we could use for all cross-cutting components going forward. But what could the timing possibly look like for those other issues? And just to remind everybody, the data privacy, climate change, and what's that?
Yeah, well, let me I appreciate you raising it from that perspective, Elizabeth. And what we'll probably do is put it back in your court when later in the day we talk about agenda prioritization, understanding that that second category is thematic issues around materiality. So that's exactly what Kelly is presenting a project proposal on right now. Other types of thematic issues on materiality that we have in mind is that Katerina is going to talk about one later today as well that relates to the business model resilience general issue category. A couple others we have in mind are things around data security and data privacy. Other aspects as well. Human capital we feel like is an outlier in terms of how extremely high important it is. With that said, that doesn't meant to minimize the importance of other projects as well. So I think that this is one of the reasons why we're going to want to get some guidance from the board on how you view this category of thematic issues, cross-cutting issues focused on materiality analysis versus other areas in our opportunity set. So sorry, I can't be more specific in answering the question. A few other ideas that we certainly have in mind. But again, it comes down to a question of agenda prioritization.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of detail is not the kind of detail we're going to be able to get to in 30 minutes at the end of the agenda. I mean, I don't know how do we have enough dialogue to be able to weigh all of those aspects together. Do we have another dialogue?
Well, we can certainly follow up. I don't think that what we're going to be able to do in just today's meeting is come up with a clear set of priorities that we would like to address in order. But I do think about the purpose of today is being thinking through the types of issues issues that arise when it comes to scope and thinking about different aspects of projects. We're dealing with a sector one, or industry-specific issue, when we're dealing with something that is more cross-cutting. That cross-cutting has a lot of potential, but brings with it a lot of challenge. And so that's important for us to think about, particularly when it comes to capacity. So, I suspect we all agree that human capital is extraordinarily important, and I don't think we need to make a decision just yet on it, but I think the work that the team has done on it, because of the things that they've been asked to focus on in the interim, the work they've been doing, which has led to a more advanced state of knowledge on what could be done with human capital, and so we're in a better position to actually decide something about that. But scoping is going to be a big, important part of that project. So we may all agree on the importance of taking on a project that's human capital. There's likely to be more variation in what the scope of that should be. So we'll have to think about all of that in the context of other things. And I'm happy to wait until later to decide on human capital specifically.
Well, maybe you can't answer this, but can you say anything about how long this project would run and what it would be?
I think you can only probably answer that question contingent on scope.
Yeah. About that, I do have a question on what is the what of this project?
Yes. Oh, I want Kelly to be able to respond to this, but to make sure she heard these questions adequately, I'll give a quick response and ask Kelly to follow up. This is the exact purpose of the research project phase in our model. These are the questions we want to answer in the research project. What should the scope of the project be? And then use that as a decision point for the board to make a determination on adding this to the standard setting agenda. So we have clarity when we move into standard setting, the scope of the project, and would, as a result, have a lot more clarity on the anticipated timeline of the project. At the research project stage, we quite simply can't do that, and that's not a problem. It's an asset that we have to work with this level of ambiguity that we have right now, bring some definition and clarity into it. Kelly, I said a little bit more than I planned to say, but want to give you an opportunity to follow up there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the comments and questions here. I think Brian covered it really well, but I think just from a high level view, we're just seeing a lot of different issues, that are important to different stakeholders, and it's, we've determined a few at a universal level, but I think we're interested in what is, I think of it as horizontal and vertical. So what is cross-cutting, what is industry specific, and what are the most material themes to focus on and to eventually incorporate into our standards if that is something that we want to move ahead with. And I think this period and this research project is the time to determine, really scope prevalence and feasibility, and to answer or begin answering those questions so we can move forward, if it's applicable, to a standard setting phase, on this topic.
Thanks, Kelly.
Just a total logistical suggestion is that, we have these 11 project categories, maybe even just tag these. If we're going to be sort of floating along this set of categories, it makes sense to tag all of these proposals that you guys are putting in front of us. Just to connect it up.
Yeah, we'll see some more of that later, so appreciate that, Elizabeth.
So if I understand correctly, the proposal to the board is to do more work in order to determine the scope, to determine the prevalence of the issue. Is it pervasive across 77 industries? Does it align with our mission? Is it feasible? And does it have capacity? Is that right? You're asking for very much do more work to determine those questions.
Exactly.
And as to say, it's like in the framework of our flow charts of how we go about updating standards, pre-agenda work has been done by the team. They've thought about this. I appreciate them updating the board on it. They're asking whether the project should continue, a more formal team should be created, more board involvement to do research on this to decide scope, which would then help determine timing, and there would be an update and a discussion at the board level, I think, on what that would be. And once we sort of decided those issues, then we could move to a standard setting phase with that, assuming that we get that far on it and see there's more criteria for standard setting agenda. So I think that, I mean, like, to me, it seems like there's clearly a need to continue to think about this area and to decide if we can figure out the timing and scope of a project. I'm not sure why we would not ask the team to continue forward with that. So, but I again want to give the board an opportunity to convey any concerns they have with the project, just so that as we move forward with it, it's going to reflect what we needed to reflect in order to the board to move it along.
And that's my question in a different way. I mean, first, I'm certainly very supportive of moving ahead with this project, and I think it's essential to us. But what would the timeline be for the phase that then brings back to us what should we put on the standard setting agenda?
So I think, and again, I would love to hear the team's view on this, but I think what needs to happen is we would clearly indicate to the marketplace that this is something that we are looking at that could affect our standards. I think that's an important thing for the market to understand, just so that they know whether or not they want to be monitoring the work that we do there. And the team would start to develop a more complete project plan, understanding the need to get certain decisions to the board in a timely manner, and that would include decisions around project scope. And it might be, I'm curious, initial thoughts on this, that in our December meeting there could be preliminary options or alternatives for scope and then the subsequent work that would be involved given the scope.
Kelly, did you want to jump in?
I think in terms of timeline, the December board meeting is a time perhaps for state. I think originally when, we kind of planned this as a 2-year project, just because there are so many issues that are encapsulated in this and given its importance. I don't know if I would hold ourselves to, something very strict. I think it's very important to establish, the fundamentals, the foundation, and to identify those issues so we do have a strong case, an evidence-based case for either a standard setting phase or to not, depending upon what we find. But I do think it's important to invest the time to research those, the topics, to understand how it fits within our existing framework and fill any gaps or make revisions based off of what we're seeing and hearing.
We appreciate the eagerness on the board's part.
So just to add to that one person's view, even if you're not ready in December to put options in front of the board, an update would probably be,
Absolutely.
For us and for the market to sort of see where we are. I too am supportive of looking at this. I think all the feedback that we heard yesterday, clearly shows that this is top of mind. It also jives with what I hear in the marketplace all the time too. But Jeff made a point earlier that I don't want to lose sight of, which is that, the board has done a lot of good work already. The board and staff have done a lot of good work already that are embedded in the standards that are already out there. And so there's a clear need to consider the rigor and whether or not they need enhancements or how to think about cross-cutting issues. But I guess one thing that I would want to add to the mix as you think about researching is the cross-cutting nature of this vis-a-vis the industry-specific nature of the standards themselves. But there's other things that we have done potentially outside of standard setting, like I'm thinking in climate, where we've done things that are non-authoritative but also provide thoughts around cross-cutting type issues that we might be able to leverage, and just consider that in the, you know, in the research maybe, and those might even be able to be done sooner than standard setting if they are not authoritative. Just to talk to.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of the work that we do is to be transparent, and in being transparent, we can have an educational aspect around the best practice and best thinking, even in advance of decisions about revisions to specific standards. That's great.
Brian, I understand the reluctance on people's parts to not commit to deadlines, and I would give that a pass that this is early and we haven't done a lot of this yet and we need to do that. But I'd like to suggest that is an integral part of the discipline that we as an organization need to buy into and create. And I'd rather have a deadline and miss a deadline and know why than have someone say, I have no idea when I'm going to get it. So I just would like us to sort of, you know, think through that. And therefore, when we think about, again, this is all part of our evolution, right? We've not had this kind of meeting before. But I think there were some really good materials here. And I think a couple things. Every proposal is not the same, but we ought to have sort of a logic to how everything gets presented to the board. And part of that over time in our maturity cycle would be an estimated amount of time, and thus a start time, assuming approval, and an end time. So something for us to think about as we get more mature.
I think that I agree 100% with that. I do think part of our plan is that by the time something gets onto our standard setting agenda, it would need the degree of transparency to communicate anticipated key stages of completion, which we would strive to meet, but could obviously update as necessary as well. So it sounds like, unless I'm hearing any opposition to it, that there's resounding agreement to continue forward with the project and great interest in scoping it out as well. So we've got about an hour and 10 minutes left in our hour and 20 minutes left in our time today, and we have a few other projects that we would like to use as illustrations of work that's been done and ways to think about potential revisions. So we'll go ahead and move right into that. Ryan, do you want to?
Taylor Reed is an analyst that leads our consumer goods sector. She is remote as well today, so she will be speaking on this next session. And just to follow up on Jeff's comment, the framing for the next few aspects of the board will hear from 3 different analysts on the team. These are not project proposals. These are earlier stage ideas and concepts that staff could turn into project proposals, but the intent of us sharing them with you today is to have them be more examples for you to take into account in the agenda prioritization discussion, as well as provide any initial feedback or reaction on these ideas or concepts to give us more information to run with on inform our decision making on whether we should continue to develop these as specific proposals pending the agenda priorities that we will form. So just want to be clear that this next session is different than these last 3 project proposals that we had. With that said, I'll turn it over to Taylor Reed.
Hi, can you hear me all?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Brian. I'm just gonna see if I can make sure I have access to move the slides here before I get started.
I can see you moving the mouse.
There we go. Great. All right. Thank you all so much for having the opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about how some of our research project proposals are coming along on a sector and industry specific basis. So I'm Taylor. I manage standards development for the consumer goods sector, and I'm going to be talking about an idea I have for a research project in the apparel industry. And this really came out of my normal sector coverage, just monitoring and tracking news and various research. And there's been a lot of attention paid to the environmental and social impacts of the fashion apparel supply chain. And so this led me to kind of look into the standards and see where this is being captured in our industry standards. And that led me to the apparel industry. And so here I have the industry description for the apparel industry, and you'll see that the industry scope covers companies involved in design, manufacturing, wholesaling, and retailing. And as you can kind of see on the right side of the slide, these activities are very different, from designing apparel to spinning yarn, weaving fabric, dyeing fabric. There's a lot of really different social and environmental externalities that come along with each of those activities. So we know these segments are pretty diverse across the value chain. And this actually kind of shows up in another, or a similar scenario shows up in another part of the standards, and it occurs in the technology and communications sector, where there is an industry that we refer to as hardware, which focuses much more on design and has disclosure topics around things like supply chain management and product lifecycle management. And then on the other side of that, there is also an industry we call electronic manufacturing services and original design manufacturing. And that focuses much more on the manufacturing side of things and has disclosure topics focused more on things like water and waste management and labor conditions. So we can kind of see here that these activities are separated into separate industries, whereas currently in the apparel industry, they're grouped into one. And I think that one reason this may have initially happened is because that when we first created SIX, our Sustainable Industry Classification System, SASB was much more focused on U.S. companies. And of course, there are fewer companies involved in textile manufacturing located in the U.S. as opposed to developing countries like China and Bangladesh. So I initially kind of started looking into this to understand if maybe companies were just vertically integrated across the value chain, and maybe one company was performing activities on the textile manufacturing side of things as well as design. So I did some initial analysis pulling data from Bloomberg and identified 395 global companies that Bloomberg picks classified under the apparel and textile products microsector, and just pulled the companies with a market cap of greater than 100. And then I broke this down further and identified about 200 companies that earned revenue from the apparel, footwear, and accessories design segment. And that represented around $987 billion of market cap. And then I also looked at companies that were earning revenue from textile and textile product manufacturing activities. And there were about 130 companies classified under that criteria, representing around $69 billion of market cap. And only 21 companies were identified as earning revenue from both of those classifications, which basically signals to us that these activities between manufacturing and design are typically separated between companies, and companies are less likely to be vertically integrated across those activities. So you'll notice here that these numbers don't add up to 395, which was our total population. And that's because that from my initial research, it's been challenging to find really good data on companies in the textile manufacturing segment. So I think that the opportunity we have here for a research project would help us develop a clearer understanding of the various segments that make up the apparel value chain. And then I think the other question that is worth looking into here to understand if additional standard setting work is necessary would be to determine if there's investor demand for this type of financially material sustainability information for companies that fall along different parts of the apparel value chain. So if this research project were to suggest an opportunity for standard setting, I think that a standard setting project could touch on 3 key aspects of these kind of classifications that we've developed. And the first one is reevaluating existing content. If the scope of the apparel industry were to change, we then have to reevaluate the disclosure topics and ensure that they're still meeting the principles for topic selection given the new industry scope. Similarly, our research project might suggest that there is an opportunity to create a new industry standard that's focused more specifically on separate parts of the apparel value chain. And then, as I mentioned at the top, we might be able to improve the global applicability of the standards to address those companies in other parts of the world. So with that, I'm going to pause here, and I'd like to hear just any general reactions from the board, and then specifically if any of you have any thoughts on some of the questions outlined here, like how important or potentially not important might this be for staff to pursue as a project, and then if there's any specific information you'd like to have before making a decision on a formal proposal focused on this sort of issue.
So Taylor, this is Bob. Thanks. And I think this is kind of a really interesting, insightful view of the business model. And the question could be whether this is something that's kind of new or it's been going on for a long time. So I thought the story was really interesting. So are you thinking that if you took this a few steps further and we look at our industry classification schemes and we look under consumer goods, where first of all, we look at oil and gas, right? We have E&P, midstream, all that. So would you think that one option here would be when you look at consumer goods, it becomes apparel, accessories, and footwear manufacturing, and apparel, accessories, and footwear design? And I say that because of your diagram show that very few companies are doing both. Most companies are doing sort of one or the other. So that kind of where you might be going, and thus there would be some slightly different SASB standards for those 2 groupings now?
Yes. That's one hypothesis I have, but as I kind of noted at the top, I think that more research needs to be done before we can make the decision of, are these the right 2 segments? Might there be others? That question of investor interest and identifying that would be critical before we made a decision on, what to, or, if a new standard was necessary. But splitting those into 2 is one hypothesis that I have.
So, Taylor, I appreciate the presentation, and just to again emphasize that we're not looking for specific decisions on this particular project, and so we would like to give Katerina and Gail an opportunity to get through there. So, because these are illustrative of the sorts of decisions that we would have to come to in prioritizing different types of projects over others. And so these are hypothetical questions at the moment more than actual questions. Elizabeth,
yeah, that's just an overarching comment and sort of answering the last question on what information we need to require this. But I understand how we got to this proposal. It was sort of like, hey, we're hearing this. in this particular industry, let's dig into it, figure out what's going on here. But actually, this suggests this is sort of a globalization question too, right? And more of a top-down. Now that we're globalized, not now that we're globalized, but now that this is a key component of what we're trying to build in here, we have to redefine in general. And so I think in terms of what information is required to say that if we need to have the top-down view here, which you guys probably have, but I think that context is needed.
You know, I think of this also as thinking about the importance of making sure we thought carefully about the way businesses operate around the world. And so what that could lead to is potentially a shift in industry structure.
But that would be much bigger.
Much bigger, but that's where really we'll be looking for the board's view on priorities going forward, so that the team knows where to spend their time. So, you know, I don't want to spend really any more time on this particular one, because we want to be able to also see other illustrations of the same types of things with the other two, exemplar proposals. So, Taylor, thank you for the good work as always.
Thank you so much.
And then next we're going to have Ekaterina, who's here with us.
Well, hello everybody. I'm Ekaterina Horden. I cover extractives and mineral processing sectors. And I'm going to cover two possible project proposals. One is touching on the cross-cutting issues, climate-driven transition to low-carbon economy and what it means for the standards. And then the second item I'm going to talk about is metals and mining industry and how we address tailings hazard potential currently, and then what further research might be needed for that item. So speaking of transition to low carbon economy, we all seen this slide of 11 themes for our possible research project. So this possible research project would touch on measurement, globalization in some aspects, and also standards application guidance. Many industries under my sector interact with each other. Many companies are integrated companies, and we keep getting questions on how to report on which industry, how to define, which standards to use. And then I get a lot of questions from investors on the measurement component of this, and I'll cover that. So here I just grabbed a few headlines from the recent Bloomberg energy issue that many of us probably have seen. It speaks to energy outlook, how it's going to transition from this black and gray energy towards green renewable energy. It's not a new subject. We've been considering and monitoring this movement in the market since pre-qualified and provisional standards. We have, Brian mentioned business model resilience topic under a couple of industries, but I also want to bring to attention that companies under this sector are transitioning. Some of them are made a bigger transition than others. To bring it back to just analogy, some of them on a different part of the course, and then their disclosure is also very different. So they might have made certain transitions, but are not disclosing the same way. And then investors want to compare one company to another. It depends, where, in which stage of transition company is. They want a comparable disclosure, comparable data, and we need to be thinking how we can provide certain guidance on that. So here I also put a quote from Carbon Tracker that says the shift to a Paris-compliant world would require a dramatic change in behavior from the ingrained cross model that sticks to oil and gas companies. And then on the left, I also want to emphasize it creates an opportunity. It's not only risk for industries under my sector, but also creates an opportunity for new technologies such as carbon capture and storage, circular carbon. We hear these things come up now, so it would be a potential new industry again. I'm speaking about apparel, or do we restructure industries under this sector? Do we create a new one for that, or do we just modify certain topics? So it could be a few different ways how we could tackle this assessment of a transitional risk under this sector. So as I mentioned, for two industries, coal operations and oil and gas E&P, we have business model resilience topics in the standards. It's a couple of discussion metrics and then a couple of quantitative metrics. And the topic is business model resilience. And then when they talk about scope of the possible project, there's a few ways we could approach it that would determine how long it would take and how cross-cutting the project would be. Do we approach from the bottom up, where we just reproduce business model resilience topic for all the industries under the sector, and then there might be different metrics for different industry because iron, metal, and steel going to be different from oil and gas midstream, but it would be the same sort of topic, cross-cutting topic in general issue category. Or do we approach this from the bottom up when we have, the climate risk is sometimes affects 69 industries, not just industries in the sector. So is it really a sector-specific issue that I need to be as a sector lead thinking, or is it a bigger picture that the entire team needs to be working on for other industries as well to keep everything aligned, make sure that we're not just imagining one world for E&D and EM sector where there's a whole other world that affected by this issue as well. So speaking to that, even industries and the EM sector could be affected in different ways. So, I hear this from investors, from staff members, and I'm on the call. One analyst from a major credit risk agency actually brought this up to my attention, saying, "Oh, we're looking at the refineries right now. The risk is very different for independent refiner versus integrated refiner who is thinking, who's already plugged in at the chemicals and can modify their business model to transition to chemicals production, plastics and things like that, not just petroleum and, fossil fuels. For midstream industries, they're very slightly different. Contractual industries, they might transition into, as long as there's something for them to transport. Is it natural gas or oil, or is it hydrogen? Is hydrogen industry picks up, or is it CO2 to store CO2 from where it's captured to be transported to where it's being stored? So they might have a different model, different risks. So that topic might mean different things for this industry. And then, service industries, they might support, sector as it operates right now, providing more efficient, water use or energy use, or again, as I said, there might be a whole new opportunity for these new technologies to emerge for carbon storage and recycle, things like that. And then the last point, it doesn't affect, again, just the sector, but it'll affect rail. There's less coal to transport. It will affect rail transportation. It will affect automobiles, obviously. It will affect utilities, electricity shifting from being powered by natural gas and coal into renewable energy. So we really have to think about the scope of this project. Is it sector specific, or should it be tackled first at the level of sector and industry, or should we really have this multi-phase project that will unfold the same way, like better alignment project, for example? So this is the question to you, the same that I already asked you. Would this be sector specific or a cross-cutting issue, or both? Maybe it's just different phases of the same project. To what extent should we seek alignment with TCFD? So this is the framework that also investors focus and speaks to climate risk. And then how do we account for this shift in business model, or do we reclassify our existing industry classification, or do we introduce and expand the business model resilience topic, where if you're an oil and gas company and you're moving towards wind, it which point you start to report on wind and oil and gas, or at which point you just report on a business model resilience topic. And then if you're a service company, you know, you have different business lines, how do we tackle that challenge? I'm going to pause here before I speak on the second item and then take questions.
I guess one question I'd leave with, and maybe you'll have thoughts, but all industries are always changing. And so that does imply that there's always some necessity to update standards. But it sounds like there's a qualitatively different question. You're saying this industry is in significant modification. There's a real disruption occurring, but it's not normal business. Am I hearing that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
And so the standards, I feel like the fourth question is probably one that looms largest, is what industry are we even talking about? Is this still the right way to classify these companies as they try to adapt strategically to a lower carbon? And just, I mean, the S&P 500 not too long ago, energy was 11%, now it's 4.5. So, you know, it's marginally larger than the utility sector, but there was a time in the 70s it was over 20 of them. So that gives you a sense of the long-term trajectory of see the construction.
I think it's a great point, and we'll just use it to again emphasize what I think is a really important thing for us to be taking away from thinking through these types of issues that the team is constantly having to cope with. Is when we think about trying to direct the team's resources to different activities, to what extent do we think industry structure, for example, is one of the things we want them to be thinking about.
Yeah, let's also remember that we've got this full sustainability industry classification system, and we put renewable energy in there too, and so maybe some of this is also kind of interacting with disclosures to talk about, when are you one category, when do you flip over to the other category, and is there a time when you start to look at both and think through how that relates?
But also what investors want to hear, they want to assess the transitional risk somehow. Once you made a transition, it's slightly different conversation for investors. They can invest just in oil and gas, they can invest just in renewable. What if they already hold equity in a company that's going through transition? They want to be able to compare one to another based on the disclosure. So we need to think about how we can provide guidance on disclosure on this transitional risk as well for the companies, so investors can make peer-to-peer comparison.
I guess would part of that be solved if they basically reported under those multiple industries? In other words, EP could report their renewable elements and progress under that framework.
If they're doing that, they would do this. But if different companies also approaching this in a different way, Shell is going to plant trees, BP is going to deploy solar. So there has to be this business model resilience topic that will generalize this in some way. And then once the transition is significant, that's when they would report. If it's only 1% of their business, they might not want to go to the trouble and report on, solar energy part of the aspect. But I think investors really want to know the risk. They want to assess the risk of this climate threat to the general business model of this companies and industries.
So it also suggests the way things like simply the application guidance could be utilized to help companies think about the different decision points, whether it's supplemental disclosure, whether it's multiple reporting in multiple frameworks, whether it's switching from one to the other. These are going to be issues that, the longer we're around and the more business changes, the more we'll have to.
And the first question to ask, are you thinking about transition at all? Are you speaking? If you're just independent designer and you only know petroleum, you won't do anything about it at all.
I think that's why I really like this project, because it really touches on, this is a big trend that's happening, but the solutions we have available to us at SASB are a number of different things we could do, whether it's industry structure, external guidance, or specific topics or metrics within the standard. So it's really kind of a menu of options, which ties it back to our prioritization.
you care about this project because it's like deeply embedded in who you are.
I love this project.
We'll factor that in.
I think it is also kind of a fun thing about this area, right? Because we're trying to mark economic shifts, and we want to be responding to the nearer term changes in our whole body of standards, but we can also make changes later on and to reflect that and hopefully more nimbly than some of the systems that get put into some portfolio management and risk tools and never get out. But
We should take the stuff about whaling ships out.
we don't know. We're trying to hurt.
I don't know if we have the resources for that. We'll see.
What I found interesting about this one, though, is that it's different from the one Kelly was just describing, where in that case we had sort of things that were tagged as one industry, where maybe it's two different industries, and now we're sort of going the other way, where you might have one company that really is in multiple industries, and so it just does go to show that this is going to be a strategic and global thought process with tactical things that we might have to do on some industry by industry, but we need to think about this not just on a one-off basis, but how to think about it more broadly than that.
It's a great point. When we are industry-based, in my view, then there's almost nothing more important than, helping companies to apply the industry guidance in a variety of different situations that they will find themselves in, as well as thinking about the continued fit and form of the industry guidance the industry structure that we do have. And, shifting industries is a big change, but there will be times where it will result in a big improvement in the quality of our standards as well. As for me, that's making sure that we're monitoring when that type of big shift is appropriate, as well as providing helpful guidance along the way. Big important thing for me.
But Jeff, I guess I'd like to just put in a plug, bridging back to yesterday. I think it raises the same issue we talked about early, which was in the application issues for companies, they're wrestling when they have multiple industries. Because of their structure by design, this is another great example of creating some guidance for users around the capability of using multiple industries. This comes from different directions, but I think that, we've got a lot of stuff to do. I think at least making our application more flexible so the users themselves can do these things, and provide it either as supplemental or actually just split the company that way. I just see this being an important way for us to be seen as being more flexible and adaptable rather than having to change the whole infrastructure for these kind of shifting times.
So, you want to?
I'll move on, yeah. So second, possible research project comes from a few different signals that I observed that happening in the space. And it sticks to metals and mining industry, and the topic that we have is waste and hazardous material management. The first signal that I observed that tells me that there needs to be some research done for this particular industry and this topic is I get feedback from reporters that one of our metrics that is number of failings in impoundments broken down by MSHA hazard potential is very BS-centric. So it's thematic, speaks to globalization aspects of our standards. And then this metric also only speaks to design of the impoundments. It doesn't speak to its current structural integrity. So that's an important point to take note as well. And then second signal that I observed is increased investor interest to disclosure on this topic. It's historically under-disclosed topic, even though we have these metrics in our provisional standards and we haven't changed them, and we proposed for companies to disclose on it. Now that has been a series of unfortunate events, there's an increased global interest from investment community. And then these are the questions they're asking, what classification are you using? So this would speak to US versus global, wherever you operate, what classification you're using. And then what condition is your facility in as well. So that tells me that maybe there's additional modification that needs to be done to our topic that also speaks to the condition of that facility, not just consequences of a failure. And then a third signal, given all that increased interest and a lack of standardized best practices, there's a global initiative that speaks to designing of best practices on managing tailings storage facilities, but it also emphasized that needs to be improved performance and transparency on the disclosure of these topics. So my question would be to the board, what are the priorities for this project? Should this be something that we do now or right now? Do we wait for that initiative to come up with recommendations for standards on managing tailings facilities, and then we make recommendations on how to disclose on the best practices, or do we just seek alignment right now for different classification systems, either one that we can use, or do you suggest different ones? Depends on geographical regions or jurisdictional areas, and how does this tie with globalization aspects of other projects? Is this super sector and industry specific, or do we tie this with other globalization projects?
So, Katerina or David, could you define tailings impoundment and tailings storage?
So this is pretty much a waste product from a mining operation, and there are two different designs. There's a dry tailings storage facility that requires more upfront capital deployment, but usually has smaller consequences if it fails. And then there are wet tailings impoundments that are such as dams and lakes, and those are the ones that have a potential to collapse and to bring unfortunate consequences.
So just to add
You're talking
on,
about in Brazil where
yes,
200 some people died.
so just to add on to that, yeah, this is a byproduct after you've extracted what's valuable from the rock that's been mined. They put it into a storage facility, and often those are with a bunch of water that's associated with the extractive process, and then they build a dam to retain that waste. And so there's been a number of incidents. There were two in Brazil, the one recently that Vale experienced. There's one that a Vale BHP joint venture experienced in 2015. Both led to significant fatalities, and there's been a lot of incidents in the industry related to these facilities. When they fail, typically it's a major catastrophic incident.
And I'm just worried off of those deadlines, but that company took a huge hit because, right? I mean,
Both times, yeah.
So what's the difference between a tailings impoundment and a tailings storage?
So it depends on, so an impoundment would refer to where you have some sort of retaining structure to hold the tailings back. And there can be other facilities for storing tailings that are essentially any waste generated by the mining operation. Here we're talking specifically about a high consequence item, which is these dams that, if they fail, can lead to huge consequences. And that's the initial evidence that supported why we included that metric in the provisional and then subsequently we codified.
So the point is, so we have the metric.
We have the metric.
So what's the point? Is the point it's becoming more prevalent? So we need to look at it?
We get feedback that's US-centric, the different classifications. So the classification we suggest to disclose on is US-centric, and then there are other, the ones in Brazil would not apply. So the company who operates in Brazil cannot disclose on that section.
So we're just missing the wording, but we have that issue in a lot of situations where there's some different terminology or different requirements, and I thought our methods a lot of times were or regional equivalent, right? Whatever those words are. So do we not have that in there? Do we need that in there, or there's?
Yeah, just to provide some historical context. So we didn't, because the guidance that Kennedy did some research on, and I did as well, is very different depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. So it's not really comparable to say or regional equivalent. They aren't even the same gradation or underlying methodology to determine hazard potential across different jurisdictions, and then some don't even have a regulatory framework.
So your kind of issue, you have a Brazil company that's on a U.S. stock exchange in Brazil in a totally different world in terms of caring about this stuff versus a U.S. or first world Is there any regulation on it?
Even in the first one, it was like regular. So there's variation in the code. So a lot is on the company.
I think really the signals that Ekaterina pointed to is we've seen two significant shifts because the incidents now investors are demanding disclosure, and so disclosure on this topic has gone from very light to significant, and so we have a huge amount of information to parse through to see what is useful of what's being disclosed now to investors, and is there anything we can learn from that from a standard setting perspective. I think the second piece is this now global initiative that has started to advance thinking and disclosure on this topic specifically, and seeing where
You said,
So they're supposed to have a public consultation launch in September 2019. As of yesterday, they haven't launched it. So I'm monitoring this, and it seems like a good timing.
But just to ground this back in our prioritization discussion, I take away from this, there are aspects to what we can do to make the standards more globally applicable. And these are some of the challenges that would be involved with that. And there may be good solutions. Some may be more difficult to come by. It also raises an issue around alignment efforts generally that we can point to something now, but then that may, because of the emerging efforts, suddenly not be, again, what we want to point to. And so, to what extent do we wait? Do we immediately point? Do we try to lead, in some respects? And I think what we do probably would depend on the circumstances. But anyway, as you think about what you think is important for the team to be prioritizing as they bring projects to the board for potential approval, these are some of the things that I would think in terms of like globalization alignment and the benefits and challenges that come with that. Great example of some of those issues.
It does seem like this one is, there's this research project ongoing right now. It's a market-led conversation with investors and companies coming to the table to talk about an agreed way to disclose the issue for multiple companies in multiple jurisdictions. So it seems like we want to benefit from that and then reflect that in our standard if it shakes out. We don't know if they'll come out with a really helpful answer that companies all agree to disclose and on a regular basis too. It seems like a good idea to watch this and then take advantage and benefit from that market initiative.
And whether this was, at some point we would take this on as a research project, obviously that would be something that you can't really do. But this is her sector, so she's also going to maintain close watch on what's going on and make sure that we're involved in the way that makes sense as well.
And quite a bit of our current reporters actually in metals and mining, so you get discussions with reporters as well, not just
Great. So we're now at about 40 minutes left on our time, and Gail is going to give us one more look at something.
Right.
And then we'll
This will be pretty quick. So I'm Gail Glazerman. I am the analyst covering renewable resources and resource transformation, and going to talk about two potential projects that are related across those two sectors. So starting with pulp and paper products, this proposal or potential project within the array would fall solidly under number 6, evaluating new or emerging issues for an industry standard. And I've been spending a lot of time familiarizing myself with some of the historic documents and documentation, and I've been noting things that caught my eye. And so this issue for consideration is, given rising scrutiny and regulation around the use of single-use plastic, should the pulp and paper standard incorporate bio-based products innovation as a topic? For a little bit of background, this was actually highlighted as a watch list item in the brief published in December 2015. There were noting potential opportunities for the industry, including just noting these wood fiber has potential toxic environmental and social impacts associated with petroleum extraction and chemical refining. But ultimately, the brief concluded the market remains small, and therefore it's unlikely that it would be significant and material for the industry. So why am I bringing it up today? Quite a few things have changed in the world of plastics over the last 4 or 5 years. Starting with China, last year they imposed effectively a ban on importing recycling from basically everywhere in the world, which is creating huge issues everywhere else in the world that ship product to China. It's creating backlogs and causing attention where recycling is just getting dumped into landfills with greater and greater prevalence. There's been a huge shift in consumer attention on this matter. Just a couple of examples of where that come from. A viral video of a turtle with a straw up its nose has led to significant regulation around the world in terms of the use of plastic straws. The coverage of the Great Pacific Plastic Patch also is like almost daily. And those two, that's related to regulation. So as I said, we've seen bans on plastic straws, but they're much more significant than that. The EU is imposing a ban on single-use plastic effective in 2021. Canada is also doing the same. Wall Street Journal noted not long ago that there were 200 bills under consideration in the U.S. to impact the use of single-use plastic. California has been in the press recently considering a ban. So there's heightened regulatory interest on this. And there's also a tangible demand element. So companies are responding to the increased focus by making commitments to change their product use. So over 400 entities have signed on to what's called the New Plastics Economy, where consumer companies are pledging that 100% of their packaging will be renewable, reusable, or compostable, essentially by 2025. And these are not small companies. They're companies like Coke, Pepsi, Unilever. So there's a demand pull, and I'd also point out Coke and Pepsi are also talking about incorporating recovered plastic into their bottles as well. So there's a material shift going on. And then taking it from the industry perspective, just a little bit of background, processing wood, it's basically the same process you use to make pulp. You can actually make products that can be converted into chemicals. So a bio-based chemical. European companies, which were probably not top of mind when that brief was written in 2015, have been talking about this and highlighting this as part of their business for a long time. UPM, back in 2009, branded themselves the Bio4 company, and their core paper business, which is still the predominant generator of revenues, is the last operation they talk about when they report earnings. Similar story, and so quite similar in terms of their focus. They have opportunities here. Domtar a couple weeks ago published a CSR, and they talked about potentially helping to solve the plastic problem. So this is something the industry is starting to look at. So certainly a lot of questions still to consider. Has the environment and scope really changed enough to render this topic material for the industry? Is there sufficient investor interest? Would it be decision useful? Is it broad enough across the industry to be pervasive, to justify being included in the standards? And can this information be captured in a format that will enhance analysis and decision making? On a related basis, something else caught my eye, again, for chemicals, also an evaluating newer emerging issue. The issue for consideration here would be feedstock management, particularly potentially percent of raw materials from renewable resources. Background here, poking around some old documents. This was something that was talked about and considered a few years ago. And as from what I've seen, I could be missing something, but it seemed to have been rejected on the notion that feedstock availability was unlikely to be a material issue for the chemicals industry, but that's not really the issue. So there was a view that there's going to be so much natural gas, there'd be plenty of feedstock, but that's not really the issue or focus that I would approach this with. So again, what's changed, I'm not going to waste your time. These are the exact same things I just pointed out for paper, with just one exception on the chemicals industry. Dow's CEO was at an event a couple of weeks ago and said that they're spending 25% of their time he's spending 25% of his time focusing on sustainability. So it's clearly top of mind for the industry. Now, if you look at the rest of the quotes, there's still a little bit of pressure and resistance, but it is increasing focus for the industry. So again, is there sufficient investor interest? Would it be to provide decision useful information? Is this already potentially a way to capture in the standards through the topic of use-based efficiency, which does exist, but has a somewhat different angle? Can that be modified? And what type of disclosures would be most of use to investors, and how is it usually reported?
Explain this a little more clearly. The first topic I got clearly here, I'm not quite sure where,
So, I mean, they're related because it's basically talking about whether or not companies report the bio-based or wood-based chemical products that the paper companies would be reporting as part of their mix. So whether
where
it's,
the feedstock fit in.
if you're making plastic, so are you using natural gas to get the materials to make the resin, or are you getting it from trees?
It's all plastic stuff. I'm trying to understand why feedstock, maybe I'm missing something.
That's the term they use.
It's the raw material. It's how are they making the plastic? Are they making it from carbon, like traditional carbon-based industries like natural gas, or are they getting the same material? You can get the same material from wood, and so it's where it's where that's coming from, and that's the whole point: is how much of it's renewable versus how much is traditional carbon-based feedstock.
The chemical is for the plastic is the cow. The feedstock is the stuff that gets to make the plastic.
So, I think this is a great example of, in a given industry or one or two industries, or even a number of industries, there could be just changes, developments that could suggest that, now we've gotten to the point where there's sufficient interest, investors that we would reach a different conclusion about the materiality than we would have when we originally considered. So as you're thinking about what you think we should be asking the team to prioritize, traits and projects that are moving forward, there might be something where you think, again, I think in terms of the four criteria that we've got, it's all about trying to improve the quality of work that we do, facilitate the mission of the organization. So, scope and prevalence. This might be something where, it's by design, it is not something that is going to affect most of the industries, but it could be that it is going to have a pretty big benefit to investors in that particular industry. And so that would be one thing to be thinking about. Whether or not there's clearly, a globally applicable solution that could that we could implement from a reporting standpoint, would also affect the extent to which it would require team efforts to develop something. So again, pretty different from the other projects that we've been thinking about. But as we think about these things, if we only do big, giant, cross-cutting blue sky types of things, then we'll be facing all of those issues, and it'll take us a while to finish those. There may be some other really good opportunities to deal with issues that we're pressing demand for as well. So it's really illustrative of that. Brian and Gail, is there anything specifically?
Not really. It's to consider. I mean, if there are any specific general items that you guys would like to see to consider a project like this, it would certainly be helpful, but we don't need to take our time today necessarily for that.
I think I do want to make a comment on this, because each one of these presentations has asked that same question: what would the board need to see? And I want to just go back and maybe just refer back to our criteria, and say, can there be a single slide dashboard to tell us of the work you've done so far, what's inspiring this project as a potential project for you? Is it clear demand from companies that we're missing something? Is it clear feedback from investors that they need a risk management measure or something? Tell us where it's coming from, and then tell us how far you are in achieving these criteria that we've already established. Have you determined that it's a pervasive issue, or not yet? Have you determined that it's that kind of stuff?
Yeah, exactly. When we think about the capacity side, that's partly as well what's available, but part of it's a fit between what capacity we have from a research perspective and how much time would be required. I think it's Mark's earlier point about when you if we were to work more on this, we suspect it would involve a significant amount of time and effort to figure out what to do, as opposed to, well, there's pretty clear opportunities to improve the standards right now.
But I think this urgency element is part of it too, versus, is it a tactical change in a technical enforcement? We're not known, but the point is something that allows us to compare projects.
Or to evaluate a given project, through this, the staff's view of whether it's reasonable given our criteria.
It's very hard to get a handle, because all these things sound important and worthwhile. I heard you describing, but we need something about this weighs the amount of effort that would be necessary to place a project with sort of the breadth, scope of improvement, the number of companies affected. So something that's measured on that.
Yeah. So, this is where we don't want to put, too much of the burden on you. We want to have this discussion to give you as much insight into what we're working with as possible, at this stage. But then we want staff to come forward and confidently say, we think this project makes sense for these reasons, touching on some of those aspects that you just mentioned, Dan, around factors such as cost benefit. So that's what we want to be able to do. And I think this next discussion around, this align at the highest level on priority. Put the individual projects aside for now. Now we've had a lot of discussions on these inputs. Let's try to align on the highest level priorities, and then staff will come forward with clear views based on that, rather than putting a list of 100 projects on your plate and saying, now rank them, which in order of importance based on criteria, cost benefits.
Yeah, they're not coming to us with a lunch tray saying, make sure it's full,
Yeah.
and grab anything from the buffet you think we might want, and that's all nine of us to weigh in on that. But they are looking for some of the themes, and I think this next part is going to be really important. So Gail, thank you for the presentation. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and Brian and all the speakers, thanks. I thought this was a great kind of refresher and a deeper dive. It kind of gets the juices flowing a little more around the issues. So I like the format. I thought it was pretty good.
Thank you.
Brian, do you want to take this next part?
Perfect. We talked enough about the purpose of this next session here. I will try to keep my comments brief to really allow as much time as possible for the board to have a discussion here. With that said, we do have a staff recommendation on priorities. We would encourage you to look at it as a straw man for the board's discussion. But with that said, some thought went into the staff recommendation, and I'll briefly explain what that thought was and how that resulted in the recommendation that you see right here. So keeping it intentionally very, very high level. Again, acknowledging there's a lot of nuance behind each of these, but keeping it very high level at this stage. Grouped this into high, medium, and low priorities: green, yellow, and red. So walking through these, trying to do it pretty efficiently, but David, Anton, others, please feel free to jump in if you feel like there are key inputs or data points that help support the rationale here. I'll try to briefly just explain the rationale behind that high, medium, or low, as well as the inputs that suggested this. So starting off with governance documents, I hope this one should be pretty clear. High priority, the staff view is keep it very reasonable in scope. I call back to Mark's comments around not letting this consume too much of staff or the board's bandwidth. That should not be as big of a challenge on the rules of procedure as it is with conceptual framework. So just keeping in mind that there's a lot of stuff we can do on the conceptual framework, but keeping it measured and balanced. Inputs for that were obviously the project proposals from Shivani. Number two, high priority around thematic issues focused on materiality. Rationale, this is a huge opportunity for us at this stage, having the codified standards and being able to conduct the systematic analysis, exactly what Kelly described in the human capital management of a project proposal. So some of the inputs that suggest that this is a important area are, of course, the SAG survey, the materiality, not consistency review session, as well as the human capital project proposal. I think all of those help illustrate why materiality level, topic level assessments on thematic or cross-cutting issues across many, if not all, standards a high priority area for us. Number 3, thematic issues more focused on the metric level, but that is medium priority. The rationale really is the higher priority is at the topic level. But with that said, there could be some issues on some potential projects at the metric level, something like whether it's an employee engagement metric or some other kind of data security, data privacy metric. That's a frequently occurring metric across the standards that we feel there's maybe a clear or reasonably clear path forward on. We don't want to lower that in priority too much. We want to have that the opportunity to bring those types of projects forward to the board if we feel like it's going to has a very, very high chance of meeting the criteria for projects. Number 4, around industry standard, reevaluating existing content, materiality. Put that as medium priority here, so lower priority than the thematic or cross-cutting issue approach for the reasons that I described earlier. And with that said, some of the input, the SAG survey specifically, where 85% of corporate and 88% of investors believe topics are financially material, helps reaffirm why we wouldn't call that a high priority topic from the staff perspective. If we look at existing content through the industry lens, the metric or measurement level, we put that as a low priority, that red circle there at number 5, really acknowledging that, thinking of the implementation status discussion, for example, that's not really where we find that companies are getting hung up as much as other areas earlier on in the adoption pathway. Moving on to number 6, industry standard, evaluating new or emerging issues. I think there's could be some exciting projects here. I've even placed human capital, connect human capital to that category. I think some of the SAG input suggested this as well. And I think we have a few other inputs, materiality map, consistency review. I think also helps illustrate that there could be some exciting opportunities there. Number 7, industry scope and structure issues. We put that at medium priority. Reason being, as a general rule, feel comfortable and confident with the 6 industry classification system, but acknowledge that there may be some one-off issues here and there. Taylor described one earlier that could warrant staff coming forward with a proposal on. Moving to globalization, put that as a green circle, but acknowledging that there is not going to be one single globalization project. The mindset here is that when a project has the opportunity to improve the global applicability of the standard, so it's going to tag that globalization trait, that should significantly escalate the priority of that project from staff's perspective.
So you're saying where there's a clear fix. Maybe 2 different things. One, where there's a clear fix, some of the low-hanging fruit we talked about yesterday, to the extent that could be grouped into one or more projects. Secondly, when we have a project, the one that Ekaterina described, it might be approached more from, like, the rationale to do it might be more from the industry-specific lens, but then it has a clear reason or clear kind of additional rationale for doing it is to improve the global applicability of the standard, and that characteristic should escalate the importance of the project.
Just put a point on that, because what that could do is take something that is pretty useful in our view right now, and make it a bit better for existing industries or existing companies. But what it could do is make the standard itself usable by businesses around the world, and that has a much bigger potential impact. The scope aspect is essentially magnified because of globalization anyway.
Number 9, technical protocol issues, put that as low priority. Our view, generally speaking, is that it's more education and awareness that's needed there, not necessarily diving right into revisions. With that said, one exception here is we do think we would like to institute something like an annual technical corrections process to group these into a very simple, streamlined process to be able to make corrections that are needed, but not go through the full project-based model or the same level 2 process. So low priority overall, but when we have clear, known, easy to fix corrections, those should be done. Number 10, standards application guidance. Put that as low priority. That may surprise people, but really the rationale is the issue is around education and awareness. Anton, chime in here if you would like, but what maybe anecdotally, what we find is 4 out of 5 times when we're talking with a company around challenges around implementation, and they have questions, their questions are answered in the application guidance, and they have not looked at the application guidance. So why would we dive into revising the application guidance if general education and awareness is lacking? I wouldn't expect that to stay low priority for long. I think at some point it will need to change. We will need to dive into it. But in the near term, call it for the next year or so, issue is around general education and awareness.
Because it is a little jarring, because adoption is really an existential issue for us, and if there are obstacles to adoption, we need to remove them. But I hear what you're saying, it may be more educational than standards.
I think what we do is we do as much as we can to drive more education and awareness with what we already have, and then be very receptive to how well that is or is not meeting the needs of the market. So for example, the SAG survey input suggests that it's a very useful resource. As we talked about, a lot of companies ask for additional clarification, but then what we need to do is have conversations with those companies around what that additional clarification might look like. Point being, it's the fact that so often the document just hasn't even been downloaded. Lastly, on alignment, we put this as high priority, but with that said, we don't at this point plan to design projects that originate or emanate out of this category of alignment, but we want to keep it top of mind. So when we have a project that can improve the alignment of the standards, then that should escalate the importance of that project. Calling back to kind of some of the opportunities that might arise out of the CRD related work.
Do these colors really drive it? I mean, to me, just from what you said, I might make globalization and alignment yellow because it's sort of derivative of other things. But I don't know if changing the color will really change anything that you do.
So think of this as a kind of a high level straw man for discussion. I think that's a really fair comment. Maybe they should be a little. We do want this to inform our priorities. We do want this to be useful. So I'm not in any way, staff isn't in any way dead set that this is the right approach for the board and staff to align on priorities. We're open to many other approaches. It could be more of a qualitative description. It could be more of an actual ranking. It could be a different approach we haven't even thought of. Open to any ideas, Dan, on how to make this more useful for staff in, it will really board and staff in aligning on priorities. Not in any way convinced that this is the right approach, is my point.
I have a reaction that you had a slide like many hundreds of slides ago that showed alignment and globalization as sort of a different part, right? Just recognizing that they're sort of, they're cross-cutting, right? So I think what Dan's reacting to is just like, all of these are not like the others, right? They're just sort of a little bit different from a concept perspective. I think this is right on personally. I would prioritize these exactly the same way. And one more point on globalization alignment, I think if we're going back to the point around adoption being like critical, I think those are so critical to adoption that I wouldn't ever change the color from green on those.
You said alignment and globalization.
I have a practical question about globalization and then 2 other items, because it seems to me that the way we improve globalization is by changing some of the specific industry standards measurements or metrics, and also by changing some of the technical protocols to reference more regional equivalents or different non-U.S. standards in a place where, what was the stat again about this? They'll look at all of the metrics and what percentage we found are generally globally applicable. 82. So in the remaining percentage, those it seems like the way to improve globalization will be through those 2 areas. So how do you think about, does that seem right to you or off base? And then how do you think about the different color lights in that aspect?
I think that seems right, but I think in terms of how we structure the project to execute those changes, should consider what the other priorities are for our work. So for example, I would approach human capital first as a project that's going to touch many metrics that are US-centric and build the globalization angle into that project. There may be some specific instances in which we have to target a given industry or a given cross-cutting metric to fix that issue, but where possible, what it seems like from the initial work that we've done is it would make more sense to make that a part of the other priorities that we're already executing. Anton, did you want to add on to that at all?
One thought on the standards application guidance. I do sort of see it also in the same bucket of alignment and mobilization, in the sense that there's another way to think about it. Not do we go through and think of the technical application guidance kind of like we are the governance documents. Like, oh, should we just do a rewrite and see where we can make improvements? I totally agree. That's a low priority. But it sounded to me like there were some other higher priority types of issues. And to me, I can think of some of the aspects around industry structure, where it might be that if a revision to the application guidance could facilitate a solution to some other issue, then that's an easy way to do that, as opposed to through changing standards or the six structure, right? Like that was a huge challenge in that sense. So that's a way to prioritize another particular issue. If we can solve it through a revision to the application guidance or through education, then that would prioritize that.
I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Is there also a way we can just explore the feasibility of a different technical delivery of the application guidance to solve the 4 out of 5 not even knowing it exists? Like literally combining the PDFs when you put the download button or something?
We actually have just recently or are right now taking a few steps to make it much more clear on the website. Not force the download, but put the download button right in front of them, so some of those user experience things. So I think those are some things we need to do first before diving into it. But I think Jeff's comment was great, that it could be used to solve other types of issues as well. But thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Now, if we're going to tackle something on the application guidance itself, I would drop the word standards and just call it application guidance. Fewer acronyms that are the same.
Yeah, we have two taglines.
So just the application, because I think application guidance is pretty clear. We produce standards, but we don't need.
Well, and I think one way to make this more tractable is try and get some of these into different buckets. Application guidance for me is different from revising a standard because of the materiality issue and technical protocol you alluded to. So I guess one question I have, there's a productivity guy named David Allen who has a 5-minute rule. If you can do it in 5 minutes, just do it, right? And so what would the equivalent of that be for you guys? Like, there's an issue with the standard, but it's pretty darn tractable. Like, would it be a 1-hour rule? Would it be a 20-minute rule? Like, when you say this is so darn easy, we should just do this. Because I think if you can bucket things into that, look, is this something we can resolve in a day or not? If not, it goes into the harder problem.
If I could just add on to that, I would say technical fixes get bucketed that way. Substantive changes could also, some will also fall into that bucket, are probably high priority because of low cost. And then it's a question of making sure that we go through the process for a substantive change to get exposure. So it's a different process to implement.
But I think what we heard yesterday is at least some aspects of globalization fall into that category. It's fairly clear what to do is
But if there are 50 things that you can do in an hour, that's a 50-hour process.
So that's what I was going to say. I think that's a great point, but if we're spending all our time on the 5-minute thing, then we won't be advancing the priorities. So having a sense of what the priorities are, dedicating resources to those, understanding what we have left, and then ensuring that we're picking up the high yield, low effort opportunities would be the way that I'm thinking about going about it. I can't give you a sense of relative magnitude right now.
I guess one other approach would be to then bring those quick fixes, a lot of those.
Yeah.
And then you just share those with us at each board meeting in the last quarter. We could be 6 things that didn't go through the cumbersome approval process. So that's a way to keep a little governance without bogging things down too much.
As long as they're not substantive change to the standard.
Right, it's an interesting discussion. My expectation, maybe you didn't do it because you didn't know how we were going to react, but in terms of agenda prioritization, I would have looked for those 9 items, or 11 items going across the top. Item 1, update rules of procedure. Item 2, update conceptual framework. Item 3, start human capital research project. So all this stuff, these are sort of topic ideas, but it's not getting to the point. So I'd like you to think about, if you started to do that, right? If you started to have all these hard items along the left and 11 dimensions along the right, then we could see the stuff that we're doing along the left-hand side that we've approved. And the spreadsheet can go on for a long time.
Yeah, that's
2 minutes, hours, all that. But the dashboard is, here are 12 things we're doing, and here's how they relate to the 11 dimensions that we sort of looked at. They might think about that, but this to me is just sort of a discussion, whereas I want to see the hard-coded items to look at. Again, and maybe because you didn't know what we were going to react to, agree to, but to me, that's what we have to start to manage.
Yeah, I agree with the importance of this dashboard, but what we aren't able to do is come up with the entire opportunity set of potential projects and then map it to this and then talk about it. We can't do that. But as far as like current status or what would likely
Infinite time.
Yeah. But I think to your point,
The council generally try and capture everything you possibly can capture, right? Get it all on one page if you possibly can, even just in a perfunctory way to say, we're not going to do data security this year, just cross it off so that you can at least make that conscious decision rather than having to bang around the edges and disrupt you later in the process. And be able to say, look, we crossed it off because you guys told us you want globalization, you want it. So for 2020, we just said not going to do it. But then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Otherwise, so I push back a little on, you're going to worry about it until you write it down and say no. And I think that's maybe the one thing I've seen at SASB is we hold a lot of stuff in debate. Look, there's no shot this is going to get done. Let's stop thinking about it and get to the stuff we have to do.
Well, so one way to think about the context for these types of discussions, what we're not going to be doing is every board meeting trying to conceptualize the infinite matrix. What we're going to be doing is getting updates on specific projects and then thinking about proposals for additional projects that the team has identified, given some of the priorities that we have set. And then we'll be checking back to see if we're not making progress, that we shouldn't be allocating time to. So we want to pull off of some of those projects. Like, let's not, it's going nowhere. So let's not waste time and resources on it and move forward. But I think like this has been, this year has been a bit of an unusual time for the Standards Board to kind of think through our alternative way of doing work and then to start to fill out our agenda given the work that we're going to be doing. And I think we will hit a regular cadence of updates, decisions, as well as periodic reviews of the agenda to think about shifts in our priorities as well as decisions to escalate or de-escalate on certain projects.
I agree with that 100%. I think determining that cadence, how often you do that, those ones, it's not every board meeting, it's not never. At some point, those are going to change. And so, whatever the right cadence is, whether it's yearly or once every 18 months. The other thing, just my general reaction is this maps pretty well to what I was thinking, what I had been thinking. The standards application guidance, I totally agree with Jeff in that in and of itself, don't look to revise that unless it's the answer to solve one of the other things, which I think it can be. The other point that I wanted to just raise is potentially getting at the point you were just making, and also for communicating this outside. This, as I think I said yesterday, this might speak to us well as standard setters, but I don't think this speaks well to the public. Overlaying, as you did yesterday in one of the slides, from implementation barriers to strategic priorities and research projects, and I think that's what you were referencing, Elizabeth. Like, when you put that up, I went back to that slide and said, okay, that fits the buckets that I'm looking for, and fits the priorities I'm looking for, because most of the things that are green are the things that are keeping people from adopting the standards, because they're practical or conceptual, And so the things that are green are in those buckets. And, you know, I would think about potentially rehashing this into those 5 buckets as opposed to 11. A matrix with 5 is a lot easier to do what Bob suggested, what I suggested. And you know, put the different projects in under those 5. I mean, you can certainly have these 11 for us, but it's just another way to tackle the same issue. But at least for me, it made a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Than 11.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that comment. Credit is due to Anton there. He's done a lot of thinking about this. Similar to how you laid that out. So appreciate those comments.
Well, I'm commenting on the slide that you guys put together that spoke to me. So it was great to know you.
So one way to also think about how we communicate to the public. You know, we're going to move forward with the human capital management project as part of really the first part of our research agenda. And so we'll be working with the communications team and the project team to think about, you know, what we want to say about that and indicate. And that'll be an example of how we communicate going forward. Our reasoning, our activities, our plans, the logic behind them, and what level of transparency at the early stage when a lot is yet still to be decided, scope, timing, versus at later stages when it's moved into a formal standard setting project. And something like human capital management as a research project could quite likely end up moving into more than one standard setting project that could be managed by people. But this will be part of the way that we communicate out, and I do think the thinking that goes into it, the reasoning, it should be part of what is available to the public to understand our decision. So, it's been a great couple of days. I've really enjoyed hearing all of the report outs. I thought they were well done, great set of materials to look through. I feel enlightened, educated, excited for the future. All 3 E's. And so I'm looking forward to future board meetings and seeing what go forward. Just as a reminder of what we're going to be doing outside of this, we will, I think we've gotten some great feedback from the board on their alignment when it comes to prioritization, along with what the research team is thinking. But I think we'll still like to reach out to make sure that any voices haven't been heard. Stephanie, if you're there and want to weigh in, I'll stay as long as you want to talk.
Sure. Yeah, no, I completely agree with what everyone has said. And I think it's more just communicating that we are focused on making adoption easier and practical for companies, because I think we're in the stage where we have a lot of potential projects to focus on, and it might get lost in terms of the message that the public hears, that, you know, this is all in service of making the metrics usable.
Great. Completely agree. Thanks, Stephanie. So we'll be reaching out on that, and then you know, since we're going to have work going forward on rules, procedure, conceptual framework, and human capital, there are 9 of you. I'm sure that we'll be reaching out to make sure involvement there. So unless there are any last comments, I think with that we will close this session of the Standards Board meeting, and note that we'll have our next Standards Board meeting after this symposium in December. Thanks everyone for joining.